Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you. I understand there's some road construction going on, so people will be walking in a little bit late, but that's fine. So we'll start with the household announcements. Cell phones, please turn them off. If you're new today, we do not use cell phones here in the hall or in the multi-purpose room or in the monastery. So if you need to make a call, please step out on the grounds away from the building and make your call so as not to disturb others. We have two bathrooms down the hall, women's room and a men's room. As you know, your shoes are off and safely in the shoe racks. When we leave for lunch, we can go out through the back door or the double doors, grab your shoes, and you can walk around to the garden sanctuary where the food will be served. And I will give you a 10-minute gong bell, and that will alert you that you've got 10 minutes to get back, do everything you need to do, and get seated for that. I think we are breaking, we're breaking, what is it, 15 minutes? Are we breaking 15 minutes in your program?
It seems like it's an hour and a half break.
20 minutes, okay, so that'll give you a little bit of time. There is tea and there's water for that break, but it's not a big break as it was yesterday. Let's see. I think that includes everything. Now, we have been doing the guided meditations, and those of you who have been doing them along with us know that they're very short, but they give you an idea of the experience that we're going towards, or trying to go towards. It gives you an intuition, something that perhaps you can practice later. So we're going to be switching the program a little bit. You're going to be part of that program in a little different way than what you had imagined earlier. So we'll save that surprise for later. But let us begin with a guided meditation that comes to us from Swami Ashokananda, the former head of the Vedanta Society of Northern California. He was a disciple of Swami Vivekananda. And he used to say that this meditation could be used for even those who are atheists. It's a meditation on unity. So we begin with our feet flat on the floor. Sit forward a little bit in your chair so that your spine is straight. That is important because that is where the spiritual current runs along the spine. And we place our hands as Vivekananda, our right palm loosely held in our left palm, upturned. And we close our eyes and begin with 4 deep breaths. Breathing in completely, holding and expelling completely. Super team, can you go ahead and tell them to be quiet, please? Feel your body as a field of vibration. From your head to your toes, feel yourself as a field of vibration. If we focus on a place in our back, we feel a point of vibration. If we feel our hands touching, that is another point of vibration. When we sit quietly, we intuit unity, pervading all. There is unity behind all our perceptions. Try to feel unity is the background of all perceptions. In the midst of all thoughts and perceptions, there is unity behind, pervading all. Feel your body. Feel the room around you. Feel the world beyond the room. Feel the perceptible unity pervading everything you experience. Everything is a vibration or wave in the ocean of unity. The body's presence is a vibratory presence in the ocean of unity. Be aware of the body as a floating vibration in the ocean of unity that anchors you in this meditation in the here and now. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. So we will begin with our first talk, The Levels of Spiritual Consciousness in the Vedanta Tradition by Swami Sarva Priyananda.
Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good morning. And we are back. The subject now is the levels of spiritual consciousness in the Vedanta tradition. Straight away, let's see what spiritual consciousness is. Let's try to understand it, and if possible, catch a glimpse and experience of it right now. We're going to go through a little exercise which will give us some understanding of what is meant by spiritual consciousness in Vedanta. So I would want you to pay attention and walk along with me when we do this. It's a short and very simple exercise, but the meaning is very profound. Alright. I'm going to give you a set of experiences. I'm going to present before you a set of experiences. Observe carefully, watch carefully, experience it carefully. Here is one experience. Yes, I would like to have your attention, yes. Here is one experience. You can see my hand. Look at my hand. Right? You can see the hand. That's one experience. Here is a second experience. Sound of hands clapping. Here is a third experience. Here is a third experience. Clasp your hands together now. Clasp your hands together tightly. Feel the pressure, the touch. Just feel it. Experience it. Don't think about it. Experience it. Alright, let it go. 3 experiences. You saw something, the hand. You heard something, the sound. And you felt the touch. One more experience. Close your eyes and think anything. Om, just think about it. Don't say Om, just think about it. Open your eyes. That was not quite seeing something or hearing something or touching something. That was a thought. 4 experiences. Seeing, hearing, touching. These 3 are of one kind. They are sense experiences. They are what one might call a gross experience, experience of the external world. Sight, sound, touch. And of course you can have taste and smell also, the other sense organs. And another kind of experience, again an experience, was a thought. Now they are all different. Seeing something is different from hearing something, is different from touching something, is different from thinking of something. Touch, sound, smell, taste, thoughts, emotions, ideas, the sense of I, the ego, they are all different experiences. They're all different from each other. Not only that, in each category there may be thousands of things. You just saw one hand right now. But throughout the day, from the time you woke up till now and for the rest of the day, till you go to bed, you will see thousands of things. Some of which you will notice, many of which you will not notice. You will hear thousands of things, not just the sound of this clap. You are hearing things, words, sounds. All through the day you are hearing. Series of sounds. You taste so many things, and we hope we have got some good tastes coming up after, during lunch. And you smell so many things. And thoughts, innumerable thoughts, thousands and thousands of thoughts. Some of which are ideas, some of which are random feelings, emotions, memories, intentions, desires, all of which belong to the category, that other category, which we will call subtle experiences. Why are they subtle experiences? But because the thing which you experience there, a thought, is subtle. It's not something out there in the world. Thing which you see is out there in the world. Thing which you hear is out here in the world. Thing which you touch is in the world. thing which you think about is subtle within us. So a variety of experiences. They're all different from each other. They all come and go. What is common to all these experiences? Right now, all the time, you will find all these experiences are happening to you, the consciousness. There is an awareness running through all these experiences, to which these experiences are coming. Do you see that? That which saw this hand, which noted, I'm seeing a hand, is exactly the same consciousness which hears, is exactly the same consciousness which feels the hands, is exactly the same consciousness which thinks Om in the mind or any other thought. It's exactly the same consciousness which experienced waking up and breakfast and driving here and is sitting here. All these experiences, the things which we experience are different. The hand is different from the clapping, is different from the holding together. The experiences are different. But in and through all these experiences runs a common thread, your awareness. Distinguish the awareness from what it experiences. Distinguish the consciousness from what it experiences. How do you distinguish that? In your understanding, that's all. Just understand that, yes, there is a common thread of consciousness running through all experiences. In fact, all experiences happen to, are noticed by, are lighted up by that consciousness. Seeing the hand is a fact, isn't it? It's a fact right now, right in front of you. Is that consciousness a fact? Of course. After all, who is seeing the hand? Your eyes take this, the impulse, the light reflected from my hand goes into your eyes, forms some kind of image that is transmitted to the brain and then somehow generated in the mind. We don't know yet how. Modern science has no idea how the brain generates the mind, but it is done because we experience it in the mind. And in the mind, you have an experience of a hand lighted up by your consciousness. At every step, note that it's a fact, not theory. Note that it's happening now. This continuous consciousness, there is no break in that. Experiences come and go. Sights and sounds and touch and smell and thoughts and emotions, they come and go. The consciousness notes and notices each one of them, illumines each one of them. Without that consciousness, you cannot have experience. Do you know that? At every step, see whether what I'm saying is true or not. Is it true of you right now? Without that consciousness, there can be no experience. What is experience? When you see the hand, what is this experience of seeing a hand? It's the object, the hand, it's your sense organ, the eyes, it's the mind behind the sense organ, and it's consciousness illumining the whole thing. I'm repeating it again. Object, sense organ, mind, consciousness illumining the whole thing. Is there a question? I think somebody might want to ask, isn't it just the mind? Why are you speaking of the mind and the consciousness? Well, notice that I just mentioned an experience in the mind, a subtle experience, thinking of Om. Think 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. Okay. Think my name, XYZ, whatever my name is, XYZ. Okay. You just had 3 thoughts. Om, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. My name is XYZ. Those thoughts are the mind. Those thoughts are in the mind. So these thoughts are coming and going. The mind is continuously changing. Isn't there something unchanging? The consciousness which is watching all these thoughts come and go, which is lighting up these thoughts coming and going. So, if there is something unchanging and another thing changing, I am justified in saying that they are different. Do you follow the logic? Are you with me? Or have I lost you?
No, we're with you.
I am not saying anything beyond your experience, your day-to-day experience all the time. I am just pointing out what exists. What it requires is careful noticing. That's all. I'm not asking you to meditate, I'm not asking you to pray, I'm not asking you to philosophize, I'm not asking you to believe, I'm just asking you to notice. This unchanging consciousness which is there throughout your day, this is what we always fail to notice. That is what notices everything. That is what gives us all the experience which we call life. And Vedanta asks us to notice this consciousness. To note that it is there all the time. There is a text. What I'm saying here is from an old text. Middle Ages by Indian standards, or even modern by Indian standards, but still 700 years old. This is a text called the Panchadashi, 15 chapters on Vedanta. This is from the very first chapter, the very first thing they tell us there. The verse goes like this. Shabda sparshadayo vedya vaichitrya jagare sthitam tato vibhakta tat samvid ekarupa na bhidyate. Shabda, sounds, sparsha, touch, sight, smell, all of these are all different from each other. These are different experiences, yes. And our waking life, all our life today, is composed of a series of such experiences. We are bombarded with experiences. They're all different from each other. He says, Tato vibhakta, apart from them, lighting them all up, samvit, the word used is samvit is consciousness. The consciousness apart from them is homogeneous, is of one form, it does not change. It's a valuable fact to notice right now. The whole of Vedanta, if you notice this right now, you're with me. If you missed the bus here, you might as well pack up now. The whole of Vedanta, there's nothing in Vedanta except what I've just told you. The rest of it is just building on this block. That there is one undivided consciousness, that's why I'm spending so much time on it. One undivided consciousness running through the whole day, lighting up all our experiences. Whatever we call my life, my experiences, good, bad, religious, non-religious, spiritual, non-spiritual, does not matter. Now he says, as we go back and go to sleep at night, this waking world disappears from our view. Even the body, which we consider to be myself, that disappears from my view. What happens? I go to sleep and I dream. In our dreams, we see another world. There are other worlds, a world of dream. People, we see people. There are events. We are ourselves there. Each one of us, we are there in our own dreams with our different body, which we are. It's all imagined in the mind. It's a dream. But what Vedanta asks us to notice is we experience it. A dream is a dream. It could be. It's false, all right. But we experience it. We see the dream. We experience the dream. Often we remember it after waking up. So a dream is experienced. What Vedanta tells us, we are not interested in what we are dreaming about. We are interested in the same thing. It's the same consciousness which runs through the dream. This is what people don't notice. It's a simplest fact of our lives, and we always ignore it. When we sit and talk about lucid dreaming, or in Freudian, free association in Freudian psychoanalysis, or you talk about a dream, a strange dream which you had, always the discussion is, what did we see in the dream? It's never who saw. What sees? Never. It's all sometimes a discussion of, I dreamt it and became true in life. It happened. Wow, how interesting. Vedanta says that's not interesting. What is interesting is what you are missing all the time. What is interesting is the same consciousness which experienced your waking life experiences the dream life also. And after some time, the mind shuts down, dreams disappear, the movie is switched off, blank, deep sleep. We slip into deep sleep. What is deep sleep? The absence of things experienced. The absence of experiences. No experiences. There are not, you don't see anything, you don't hear anything, you don't smell anything. You don't have thoughts and ideas, not even the thought, I am sleeping. If you think I am sleeping, you are not sleeping. Not even that thought. No dreams also. But here is the amazing thing. The absence of all experiences is also noted. It's very subtle, you have to give time to think about it. We don't think about it that way. You see, we confuse consciousness. Vedanta tells us we are confusing consciousness with the mind. So when the mind shuts down, we think there is no consciousness. If you see consciousness as the light illumining the activities of the mind, when the mind shuts down, the light illumines what? The absence of the activities of the mind. A famous Christian mystic, I don't know if it was St. John of the Cross or somebody, give a beautiful example. You see, he speaks about the blackness of the night sky. And he says, it's actually full of light. I don't know how he understood that at that time, because now he knows it's true. Sunlight is streaming through space, but there is nothing to reflect sunlight. That's why when you see a satellite moving up in the night, evening sky, you can see it shining. If you have something to reflect light, you can see it. If there is nothing to reflect light, even light will not be seen. I illustrated this once at a conference in India. One of the most ancient universities, Indians will know this, Nalanda University. The ruins are there. It was established around 500 or 600 AD and it was finally destroyed around 1200 AD, which is when the first monasteries which ultimately became Oxford University were starting. And the conference was there. Not in the ruins, the more modern, smaller version of the Nalanda University. Now, so they had a projector, where you project for a PowerPoint projection. I was trying to explain this, that without anything to reflect, light also remains invisible. There's a powerful beam from the projector, which comes on the screen. Now that beam is usually not visible. But if you thrust your hand in the middle of the beam, you can see a bright white light shining, reflected from your hand. It's a beautiful example. I don't know how I thought about it at that moment. Watch, there is light right here. It's full of light. You don't see it. I put my hand here, it's shining in the blue-white glare of that projector. I remove it, you can't see the glare of the projector. In the same way, in deep sleep, the consciousness is fully awake, as it always was. And yet there is nothing for consciousness to be aware of, no experience for it to be aware of. No thing, no sound, no sight, no thought, nothing. So consciousness is not appreciated as consciousness, but it's still there. The proof is that when we wake up, we feel that I went to sleep, I dreamt, and there was a period of nothingness. Deep sleep. Otherwise this whole concept, this idea, this feeling of deep sleep wouldn't exist at all. If you had no experience of the absence of experience in deep sleep, what would happen is, I would go to sleep, I would dream, and then I would feel, okay, I dreamt and now I woke up. The intervening period of deep sleep would not be noted at all. Absence is as much noted by the consciousness as the presence of experiences. That's what I want to say. So deep sleep is also an experience. In a conference in Calcutta between neuroscientists, philosophers, and there were monks, a very interesting gathering. And we were not making any headway. The topic was consciousness. And then one philosopher, Gerald Larson, he's a Sankhya philosopher, but an American philosopher. He asked the neuroscientist, doctor, in neuroscience, in deep sleep, what do you say? Is there consciousness or not? And the doctor said, he's actually a scientist, he said, according to us, in deep sleep there is no consciousness. It's a state of unconscious. There's no consciousness in deep sleep. And the philosopher, Gerald Larson, he said, well, that's the difference. According to Sankhya philosophy and Vedanta also, In deep sleep, there is only consciousness. No consciousness, only consciousness. What do you mean only consciousness? You're not aware. It's not that you're not aware. You're not aware of anything. There is nothing to be aware of. It's just consciousness. Okay. This unbroken consciousness throughout our days, throughout our dreams, throughout our blankness, deep sleep, this unbroken consciousness, it continues. This is the story of one day. This is the story of one day. And Vidyaranya, in the first chapter of Panchadashi, he says, Tadvad dinantare. Exactly like that. The next day's story is also the same thing. It is unbroken consciousness experiencing the waking world, experiencing the dream world, experiencing absence of everything in deep sleep. And the next day, and the next day. Masabda. This is months go by, years roll by. Our life passes before our eyes, or rather before our consciousness. And then he says, centuries and millennia roll by. The body goes and new bodies come. The Hindus and Buddhists believe in reincarnations. Body after body comes. The same consciousness watches. And it's beautiful poetry there. Nodeti nastameti samvid esha swayam prabha. This self-effulgent sun of consciousness neither rises nor sets. What rises and sets? Bodies are born and they age and they die. Minds develop and thoughts come and go and then go into dream and deep sleep and again waking. All of this rises and falls in words of Aurobindo, in the white glare of an immortal eye. In the white glare of an immortal gaze. The immortal gaze is you, the consciousness, which is there right now. Right now. The white glare of an immortal gaze. This immortal gaze, this white glare of immortal gaze is what is meant by spiritual consciousness. Levels of spiritual consciousness we're speaking about. So, this unchanging consciousness, which is there right now, all you have to do is notice. How do you notice that? Go from the experience here. Experience. Sound. Sight. Touch. Thought. From these experiences, or from the absence of experiences, go from that to the witnessing consciousness. The claim is, it's a fact right now. If you want to relate it to religion, you can. If you're not religious, if you're not interested in relating to religion, you don't have to. You can see it's completely impersonal. It's completely impersonal. It's deeply philosophical, deeply psychological. It doesn't have to do anything with belief. And yet, it's not today's subject. It's beautiful how Vedanta uses it, not to undercut religion, but to support religion. Vedanta provides this as the foundation of religion. Today over breakfast we are discussing how people from different traditions, non-Hindus, Christians, Muslims, they have come and said, after studying Vedanta, understanding Vedanta, I have a deep faith in my own religion now. I can begin to believe in religion again after understanding Vedanta. Vedanta provides a foundation. A Christian preacher came to our monastery in Hollywood, and over breakfast he was saying one of the funniest things I've heard. He said, I'm able to be a Christian preacher with a clear conscience that I believe because of Vedanta. Without this idea, you don't even have to use the label Vedanta. Just this particular idea. Here is something real. Swami Vivekananda says, here is something a man can stand upon. He says, we must not only have faith, but we must have intellectual faith too. The intellect must assent. Yes, it's true. It's true. The problem with faith without intellectual assent is a continuous conflict. I would like to believe maybe, and I can't. So, this foundation, this is what is called spiritual consciousness in Vedanta. It's what we are. Vedanta says, what comes and goes is not you. Have you noticed one thing? The consciousness continues all our lives. And what else continues? You. It's your life. You are the one who's continuing through babyhood and teenage and childhood and youth and middle age and old age, and for life after life, you continue. You and this continuing consciousness are one and the same thing. We are that consciousness. Vedanta's final teaching, Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art. That consciousness you are. God is exactly this unchanging consciousness in Vedanta. That's how Vedanta supports religion. In that case, Swami, am I God? In that sense only. Not in the sense of Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so. Or even Swami So-and-so. It's not a person. A person is never God. But that unchanging consciousness is what is understood in Vedanta, Dvaita Vedanta, as God. They will say, okay, let me say it outright, very bold. You are nothing other than God. Which means you are not a body, not a mind. These things come and go. We are not denying it. They come and go. They change before your very eyes, before your very consciousness. You are not the body, not the mind. You are that spiritual consciousness which we are calling God. Even more radical. Wait for it. There is no God apart from you. As a Swami in the Himalayas said, there is no Brahma, Vishnu, Durga, Krishna, Rama, Ramakrishna, nothing apart from the real you. Swami Premeshananda, whose letter I read out yesterday, a senior monk under whom I worked in one of our monasteries, served for a few years, he told me the story. When he went to Swami Premeshananda, whose letter I read out yesterday, he used to go to him before becoming a monk. One day, this old Swami, a disciple of Holy Mother, Ma Sharada, looked at this young student and said, he took his finger and touched him here suddenly. Just a touch, nothing supernatural. And this person just jerked back, just startled. And the Swami said, right, that very thing, there, right there, there is, and he used an abusive word in Bengali, there is no rascal called God apart from that. In Bengali, Oi chhada kono shala bhagavan nei. Other than that consciousness, which through the body and the mind reacted in this way. But the consciousness, of course, in itself it does not react, only through the mind and body. That consciousness in itself, that pure consciousness, is God, and nothing other than that is God. That is what is worshipped as God in religions. So this is the understanding in Vedanta. This is spiritual consciousness. Now, levels of spiritual consciousness. I'm just keeping track of the time. We have time. 20 minutes, yes. Alright. The important part of the talk is over. If you want to take something away from this talk, that's it. This one fact. And it goes on working. Once you've heard it, there's no going back from the door. Because it's our own inner truth. Once we hear it, it will resonate with us. There's something deep within us which says, yes, it's true. I may understand it in a different way, I may use different language for that, but what this teaching tells us is true. It's in fact the most fundamental fact of our lives. After this, everything else comes. Science comes, and religion comes, and belief comes, or lack of belief comes. Everything, good and bad, morality, immorality, everything comes after this. It's that light first. It's that light last. In waking, in dreaming, and in deep sleep. It's one and continuous. Okay. Now, the stages of spiritual consciousness. Remember, there's one thing to say before we go into the stage. These stages, the levels of spiritual consciousness. You might yourself have understood it by now. Swami, isn't it contradictory to say levels of consciousness? Because this level, you have just said that this consciousness is continuously unchanging. What levels? Right? So, consciousness is unchanging. There are no levels in this spiritual consciousness. But there are levels in the mind. in the mind which grasps the spiritual consciousness, which establishes itself in the spiritual consciousness, there can be levels. We have just understood that waking, dreaming and sleep are not stages of consciousness, are not states of consciousness. We loosely speak, even Vedanta also, we loosely speak about waking, dreaming and sleeping as states of consciousness. But now, all of us, we can say, okay, those are states of the mind, not of consciousness. Mind is awake, waking state. Mind is dreaming, dream state. Mind is shut down, deep sleep. Consciousness, one and the same. It watches lights up the waking mind, lights up the dream mind, and lights up the absence of the mind. So, all of this, consciousness does not go through states. The mind goes through states. But levels of consciousness we can speak about. There is a book called the Yoga Vashishta. Okay, time for a story break. People are, okay, so heavy dose of Vedanta, you know, so what? A story. And this is a real story. About 12 years ago, I went to the Himalayas. Swamis also take breaks, vacations. But the vacation is, I stayed in a log cabin for on 2 occasions, 2 months each. So this was 2004. And I was a newly minted monk when I got this robe and all. We get this after 10 years of practice and then we become a monk. So 2004 with Swami Ranganathanandaji, who was the president of our order at that time, and he blessed me with sannyasa with this. And so I went off to meditate in a Himalayan cave. And I also read Swami Vivekananda's, he's saying, a real downer. He said, "He who runs away to meditate and die in a Himalayan cave has missed the way." Anyhow, I wanted to live in the mountains. So I went up to this cave and I was living there. And it's very different from here. It's not very cold, I mean, not as cold as America gets in some parts of America. And at that time it was not particularly cold, maybe it was in the 50s, maybe 40s or 50s. But the thing there is no heating. There is no, if it's 40 outside, it's also 40 inside, and your bed is also 40. so it's cold, it's uncomfortable. And of course, there was no bed, there was no chair or no table, no electricity, no running water, no piped water. So I slept on the wooden floor on these rugs, which were older than me. So 3 rugs below me and 3 above me, and that's it. And very dark, because you have to close the windows. There's a howling wind outside. At night, it's cutting, biting wind. So you have to close the windows. When you close the windows, if you wave your hand before your eyes, you can't see whether your eyes are open or closed. Once in a while, you get a static electricity jumping from your woolens, that's all. In the next cabin, there was a monk. His name was Brahma Chaitanya. And he had lived there. It's a very interesting story of his life. I will not go into that. But what he did was, and to give you an impression, if you have seen The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf, so it's a lot like that. He had a white robe up to his ankles and a long beard, more than Gandalf, I mean up to his thighs, I think, and these locks of hair which he kept rolled up because they would descend to below his knees. And he used to tie them up. He's a tall, well-built person. He was born in his 60s or early 70s probably. But anyway, how he became a monk and all that is a very, very interesting story. But what this person would do is, from early in the morning when it was warm enough to come out of his log cabin, he would come out and sit in the sunlight outside. It's a magnificent scene around, you know, towering mountains. And when I mean towering mountains, those are the real giants on this planet at least. They soar up to 20,000, 25,000 feet, the real giants of the Himalayas. Not the Everest, you can't see the Everest there, but other mountains. And we were in the valley. The valley itself was only 10,000 feet high. And there was no snow there, but you could see the glaciers running down and snow on the peaks of it. It was summertime, so. And he would sit throughout the day translating this text called Yoga Vashishta, which I'm going to tell you a little bit from. You translate this text throughout the day. Once he would go for begging food, I would accompany him. Otherwise, he would sit there and translate. and from Sanskrit to English. And I know you're going, okay, where can I get this book? Is it published? No, it's not published because you translate and it's 5 volumes. So you would have this pile of notebooks by the time you translate it. And when you finished it, what he would do is, over a period of 3 or 4 or 5 years, he would finish it. He would take it and throw it into the Ganges. And then come back and start all over again. The reason being, he didn't want to become an author. He wanted to keep his mind. He told me, I want to keep my mind on this non-dual truth. It's a meditation for him. He doesn't want to become famous or popular. Wonderful. Now this book, I'll share a gem from this book with you, Yoga Vasishta. So there are 7 levels of spiritual consciousness. Because we have this subject, so I thought, where can I find levels of spiritual consciousness? So there are 7 levels. Remembering all the time, there are no levels in consciousness. But there are levels in the mind. Now, keeping that in mind, we shall see. 7 levels. What are the levels? I'll give you the Sanskrit word and what it means. And we can see, we will identify with some of the levels, and at one point we'll stop identifying and say, okay, this is what has to be attained after this. First is called Shubhecha. Shubhecha means good intention or right intention. We awaken into spiritual life. Hey, there's something to this. It's not new age nonsense, it's not wishy-washy stuff, it's not unscientific. There's really something to this. And I need it in my life. It's just what the doctor ordered. So, we decide to investigate it further. We sign up for the Vedanta conference. We come to the Levels of Consciousness conference. And we want to investigate it. And we read books, we try meditation, we try to make changes in our lives, the way we are living. We change our goal of life, slowly but surely, sometimes unknowingly, that our goal from a very limited worldly perspective, it takes on a spiritual perspective. This shift is called right intention. Not just the intention in the mind, actually our life begins to change. We start doing things differently, thinking differently, searching. In Sanskrit, this is called jigyasu, a seeker. Seeker. You have already moved beyond conventional religion. Conventional religion, I want a good life in this world, and after that I want to go to heaven or whatever, and I believe in God. I'll go to the temple or the church and attend the puja or the service. But the whole purpose is good life here. You say, Swami, what's wrong with that? Nothing wrong with that, but that's still worldly life. I'm using God as an add-on, an optional add-on to make my life better. I'm using religion and church and temple and God, better life, wholesome life, good life. From an immoral life to a moral life. From an irreligious life to a very good person. Nothing wrong with that. But you have already moved beyond that. When you go to the first stage of Shubhecha, you become a real seeker. This life, I see the limitation. It may be a good life, but even good life has its limitations. I'm going to get old and die. That's it. What was the purpose of all of this? What's the meaning of all of this? Is there really God? Is there really an immortal soul? Can we actually experience God? When you start asking these big questions in life, when they become the central questions of our lives, we are in the first stage, and only the first stage. The second stage comes when we start practicing in dead earnest. That is, it's called, from Shubhecha you go to Vicharana. Literally it means reasoning or analysis or philosophical investigation. Philosophical investigation is correct. It's or spiritual inquiry. Okay, spiritual inquiry is even better. Vicharana, spiritual inquiry. It consists of listening to these truths. You're already in that stage. I'm sorry, you can't go back now. Second stage, listening to these truths, thinking about it, studying, and trying to get a feel for it. It consists of numerous other practices. Later on, some of you had questions about spiritual practice, prayer, meditation, doing good works. Where does it all fit into what you are saying? So later on, if you get a chance, we can discuss that. But it's at the second stage, all these spiritual practices come in. Are you repeating a mantra? Are you meditating? Are you doing good works? Are you changing your life? Are you setting moral standards higher for your life? Are you leading a responsible life in society? So many things come in at this stage, where you are up and doing. And at the core of it is the philosophical investigation, spiritual inquiry. Who am I? Am I noting the continuous, unchanging spiritual consciousness? Are there doubts? And there should be doubts. If there are no doubts, you haven't thought about it. Doubts have to come. Is this right? Scientists don't say that there is such a thing. It's just the body and the brain. So such doubts have to come. There have been many, many different points of view. They have to be raised, and they have to be discussed, and you have to find a resolution for those doubts. Second stage. At the end of the second stage comes a clear, unmistakable feeling. It's real. Earlier it was a theoretical understanding, and maybe you wanted it to be real. Maybe you thought it's a nice thing. But now, unmistakable. You can't go back anymore. It's there. It's right here, right now, all the time. Third stage it segues easily into the third stage, which is called Tanumanasa. Tanumanasa means thinning the mind, literally, attenuating the mind, focusing the mind. Tanumanasa. Now what you do is, not so much spiritual inquiry, not so much Vedanta classes. Now you've found it, you try to stabilize yourself in it. A big change comes in the third level of spiritual consciousness. You are no longer seeking it. You know it's real. You know it's here. You know it's right now. You know it's within myself. There is no doubt about it anymore. Now a tremendous eagerness comes to make it a living reality. Like this world is a living reality, this body is a living reality, my life is living reality. That spiritual consciousness should not remain bound up in philosophy books. Let me see it for the first time. See within quotes. You can't see it as an object. So Tanumanasa, when you start meditating upon it finally. Then comes a real breakthrough. The first three are called, they're still seekers. But at the third stage, you have stopped being a seeker. You have found it, you noticed it, it's right here. Sri Ramakrishna says, it's like a thief who knows there's a thin, flimsy wall and there's gold on the other side. Can that thief sleep? No. How will I break through this and get that? In the same way, we know it's there. There's no doubt about it. Now we want to break through. The fourth stage is the first breakthrough. It's called Sattvabhakti. Sattvabhakti, attaining reality. It's beautifully named. For the first time you get the sense of waking up. Unless we do it, it cannot convey the sense. For the first time you see the veil lifting from your eyes. For the first time you feel, I'm truly awake. Till that point, it's a clear, unmistakable point. You walk through that door, and there's no walking back anymore. Till that point you feel, I was walking as if in a dream. The Buddha, when he first attained enlightenment, he was going, before he gave the first talk, he was going towards Sarnath. He was walking from Bodh Gaya. Somebody asked him, Houston Smith mentioned this he starts his chapter on Buddhism with this. As the Buddha, the newly minted Buddha, was walking on his road to becoming the Buddha, whom we know as the Buddha, a young boy saw him, a shepherd boy, and asked him, not who are you, what are you? And Houston Smith beautifully writes there, he says, many people we have all been asked, who are you? But very few people in history have been asked, what are you? What are you? Are you a god? And Buddha said, no. Are you an angel? Buddha said, no. Are you a man? Buddha said, no. Then what are you? He said, I am the awakened, I am Buddha. Meaning thereby, the rest of us are either sleeping or we are walking about, we are sleepwalking, we are in dream. The Sattvabhakti, for the first time, it's real for you. And the sign of that it will never ever go away. It will never ever go away. You can try to drive it away, you can try to forget it. It's ever blazing forth in life. Unmistakably. It's called Sattvabhakti, attaining the real. Yeah. And then the next stages are just deepening this awareness of the real. The next stage is called Asamsakti, where the world fades away to a dream. Like a dream-like appearance. It's not real anymore. that light blazing forth not only within yourself, in every experience. It's not a concrete world out there anymore. It's something imagined in consciousness. It's something supported by consciousness. So that, I'm using consciousness, but it's not consciousness in the normal sense we use. So that thing is called asamsakti. We are no longer attached to the things of the world. The sixth stage is called padartha abhavana, where the person remains immersed in the bliss of that reality and the world fades away from his consciousness. Most of the time this person tends to remain in nirvikalpa samadhi, but he can be pulled out of it by the efforts of others. We see that again and again in Sri Ramakrishna's life. Goes into a deep trance and people have to chant the names of God and somehow pull him out of it. And the final stage is called, seventh stage is called Turiyaga. It's the final absorption which saints attain towards the end of their lives, from which they cannot be pulled back anymore. The world simply fades away from the consciousness and they remain as Brahman, as pure consciousness itself. So you can easily find out which level you are in, 1, 2, 3, or
0.
No, nobody who is here is 0. Indubitably it's 1. It's 1. You are a spiritual seeker. We have taken one step beyond conventional belief. It happens to people. It happens to all of us. We are all definitely, we have started this life. Otherwise you won't be here. Why come here on a Sunday morning? You can watch the game or something. You can relax at home after a busy week. Why take the trouble of coming here and listening to a Vedanta talk of some philosophy written by some sages on the other side of the world 6,000, 7,000 years ago? Why? So 1, definitely. I have time for 1 question or 2 questions. Okay, here's a question. He was quick off the gun, so he gets to ask. But make it a quick question.
For most of us lay people, the notion of one stream of consciousness is pretty difficult to, it's abstract.
Let me stop you just there. I'm sorry, I'll stop you just there. Watch the question and the language. One stream of consciousness. It's a common phrase, stream of consciousness. What would Vedanta say here? Make the difference between the stream and consciousness. A stream is a stream of change. What is it a stream of? Of the world. You saw one stream of experiences. Consciousness is one unchanging. Yes, go on.
But if you discern it as the consciousness that we are aware of,
yes,
and then the subconscious mind and the superconscious mind, which explains when you go into sleep and you think you're not conscious, and really divinity is aligned with being able to influence the subconscious mind, aligned with where your Kundalini Shakti is, right?
Wait. At this point also, let me just point out again. Are you listening? That which is aware of the subconscious mind and conscious mind and superconscious mind, what Vedanta would say is, I'm not interested in the subconscious mind and the conscious mind and the superconscious mind. What am I interested in? In that which is aware, you use the word. We are aware of the conscious mind, subconscious mind, superconscious mind. What is aware? Who is that we who is aware of these minds? That is what Vedanta is interested in. I'm not even interested in influencing that or not influencing that. Vedanta continuously drives you back. Right? It's not what we... exactly. So it's not anything to do with the things of this world. Everything else is to do with rearranging the things of this world, rearranging our lives, rearranging our minds. Vedanta is what is beyond the world and our lives and our minds. What is watching all of this? Vedanta is not about doing anything means changing something. Vedanta is about that which notes the change. You don't do anything to it. It's absolute and fixed and constant all the time. It is that which enables all change and all experience in the world. You can have any change you want to make. All those changes will be necessary for spiritual practices. But the witnessing consciousness is one and the same, whatever you do. If you decide not to go ahead any further with this, it's the same consciousness. If you decide to go ahead further with this and go to the 7th level, Turiyaga, it's the same consciousness. Again and again in these levels of consciousness, it is pointed out. The very beginning and the very end, from first stage, first level and seventh level, and one who has not even entered, 0 level, in all their cases, the spiritual consciousness is one and exactly the same, unchanging. The change is only in the mind. No more questions now. We have run out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Friends, for those of you who are coming in late and wish you could have more dialogue time, we do have a talk tomorrow night at Southern Methodist University in Proto Hall, and it is open up to the public. It's $10 admission. It's entitled Investigating Consciousness, a Swami and a Shaman, and it is from 7 to 9, Proto Hall, Southern Methodist University. Our next speaker is going to be Roger Laborde, and he is going to be speaking on the transformative effects of healing consciousness.
That's what she thinks I'm going to speak on. And you know, if I don't do this, we get our hour-and-a-half break. Swami, you said something earlier that popped into my mind. And first of all, I want to know how many are here today that were here yesterday? Oh, good. So good. I can feed on what I said yesterday. So you know, in 1977, I took everything that I believed in and put it in a psychological bag and threw it out of the window. Well, about a year after that, I think I was in Arizona and I was visiting a relative. And he had a single wide trailer, and out in front of the door was a large concrete patio. And he had potted plants around the patio. So I was talking to him exactly about what you were talking about one consciousness, and putting it in terms that maybe he would understand, which he was a devout Christian. So at one point he said, wait a minute, you're saying you're God. You're saying I'm God. All right, I want you to move that potted plant over there. So I got up to go over and move it. He said, no, sit here and move that potted plant. I said, don't you realize it's just as divine for me to get up and go over there and move the plant as it is to sit here? You're the one that's putting the limitation on what God is. So thank you for that reminder. So transformative effects of healing consciousness. I don't even have an idea or a clue how to go about talking about that. As I said yesterday, I can only share with you my experience and my journey. And maybe my stories of my journey will, I feel it contains that transformative message in healing consciousness. But that was such a strong reminder of my relative back then in the 70s. And I keep running into the same thing. So, where to begin with transformative effects of healing consciousness? Well, there is an encounter that I had early on in the early 1980s that brought about an experience of the experience of connection. And Brahmaprana knows this story. It's my story of the little bird. I was sitting on this island and sitting in a home, and just had my first child, well, not my first daughter. And I was thinking about how are we going to make it? Where's the money going to come from? How are we going to pay for our bills? Didn't even have enough money for the rent for that month, and wondering how it was going to work out. And I was deep in concern about that. When suddenly I had on the window, it was a sliding glass door right next to me, and it was a little bird about this big that had slammed into the sliding glass door, and it collapsed on the concrete outside. Well, it broke my train of thought. It immediately moved me out of where I was in my own mind. And I went and I opened the door and opened the screen and walked out, and I bent over and picked up this little bird in my hand, and it was motionless. I didn't know if it was dead, if it was stunned, or what was going on with it. But I walked back in the house, I closed the screen door, closed the sliding door, sat at the table, and I had this little bird in my hand, and I put my other hand over the bird, and I just sat with it. I wasn't trying to heal it, I wasn't trying to do anything with it. I was just being right there with this bird. There were no thoughts in my mind, I was just sitting there. So I don't know how much time went by, probably maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and I started feeling a little movement in my hand. And then more and more time went by, this little bird finally stood up and was basically with very strengthened one leg. The other one was still kind of wobbly, had one eye shut, the other eye was beginning to open more. And it stood there longer and longer, and then finally got stronger and stronger, and both eyes were open, and it was moving around in my hand and looking at me, and I was looking at this little bird. So finally I started thinking, well, I don't want this little bird to fly off and it's going to be trapped in the house and I got to figure out how to get it out of the house. I'm going to walk outside with it and hopefully it will stay in my hand. So as I walked to the door and I opened the sliding glass door and opened the screen door and all the noise and all the movement, this little bird never moved. So I stood outside and I held up my hand for this little bird to fly off and it didn't leave. And I held it a little higher and it still didn't leave. And then I looked at it and I said, you know, it's okay to go. And I held my hand out and it didn't leave. So then I bent over close to the ground to where it hopped off my hand onto the concrete. And as I stood up and I lifted my hand up, the bird flew up and landed on my finger and looked at me. And it deeply moved me because there was a connection. That connection was really deep. And the way that I took it was that there was also a mutual understanding of that connection. And finally I threw the little bird up in the air and it flew away. So that experience lives with me very strongly today. And it's not just with this little bird that I run across this. There was another instance where I was living high in the mountains of Colorado on 180 acres, and there was a particular hill on our property that was a snake den. And by snake den, I mean that during the wintertime, this is where all the snakes in the area would go to hibernate for the winter. Pretty much hibernate. And many of them were rattlesnakes. And there's only one kind of rattlesnake in Colorado. It's a prairie rattler, and they're not really very big, but they're still dangerous. So when we first moved onto this property, I went out and I walked up with my wife up on the hill. And I have a high frequency hearing loss from working around high intensity, loud machinery when I was a teenager. And so sometimes I can't hear the rattling of a rattlesnake, but my wife can. And I could hear some of them, and she was getting a little nervous because there were a lot of them around us. So we stood there, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to let them know that we were on the property, which I'm pretty sure they knew it. And what I wanted to do is let them know that we were not going to harm them. We were friends, and what I was asking for them was, I will respect your space, and I'm asking you to respect ours. And I offered some tobacco in the Native American tradition, which is to honor their presence. So we lived on this property for about 3 years, and it was about 2 years long. And we saw them nearby the house, but no more. They didn't come any closer than maybe 100 yards to the house. So at one time I built this greenhouse, and I was working around the greenhouse, and there was tall grass around the edge of the greenhouse. Had my sunglasses on, had my hat on, and I had some thin leather gloves because I was working in the dirt and working in the grass. And there was a shade from the greenhouse where I was working, and as I was moving around, my hand bumped something. And then a few seconds later, my hand was moving and it bumped something again on the back of my hand. The third time it happened, I took off my glasses and I looked, and it was a coiled up rattlesnake, and I was bumping its nose. So I looked at him and I said, well, thank you, brother, for not biting me. I really appreciate that. And I went over and I got a flat shovel, and I picked it up and walked it out about 150 yards from the house and let it go, and he went on his way. So there was another instance where I could have been harmed, and he was coiled up, but he wasn't rattling, and he wasn't being aggressive. And I really think that there was a bond, there was a communication that was going on, that he knew that I would not hurt him. And in respect for him, he also had some respect for me, if we want to call it that. So this movement in healing consciousness I consider that a healing consciousness. I consider that a healing experience in the movement of what we can consider healing consciousness, because it's reminding me of the connection, which in my view and in my journey, that's what healing consciousness is about. It's always being connected to knowing that we're not separate. And that my healing is your healing is my healing, whatever level that might be, whether it's psychological, emotional, spiritual, or physical. Now, the physical part of it, I always look at it as the last manifestation of the healing energy, because it goes much deeper than just what we see physically. Now, along that route, one of the things that happened, and this is long after Gerald introduced me as a healer to the Institute of Noetic Sciences and also to a number of other people, and this was early after our adoption in 1982. But this is later on in 1988, and I met a medical doctor in Boulder, Colorado, who was doing brainwave research. He was very much in altered states of consciousness as it relates to healing, and was trying to measure those states of brainwaves. So it's not that he had heard about me. I met him and he really knew nothing about me, but they were looking for guinea pigs to hook up the skull cap with all the leads, and they had, his partner was the technical genius who had created what is called the NeuroSearch 24 at that time, which was a state-of-the-art 24-channel brainwave monitor. And they could bring it up on the computer monitor and in real time see what parts of the brain lit up. So what they did is that they were looking for guinea pigs, looking for volunteers. I volunteered to do that. So they brought me in one day, and it was the computer genius and the technical person, and then Ed Wilson, the MD. And Ed was more of the idea man, the inspiration for the things that he wanted David to build and to be able to measure. So they hooked me up, and they were confused. They had me hooked up for a while, for a few minutes, and then they would take me out of the room and have me in a different room. Then they would bring me back and hook me up again, and then there was a lot of commotion. This went on for about 40 minutes, in and out, in and out. And and I was wondering what was going on, so finally, the last time that I was in the room and they had me connected to the NeuroSearch 24, Ed Wilson, the doctor, said to David Joppa, David, it's not the equipment. There's nothing wrong with the equipment. He's producing this. I can feel it in my stomach. He's doing this. And what was going on is that they were seeing brainwave patterns they had never seen before. It was very low delta waves, down to, I think, 0.8 to 1.2 hertz. I think it's hertz or megahertz, I can't recall now. And they thought something was wrong with the equipment. So they took me out of the room, and I was alone for about 10 minutes, and then Ed came in and said, Roger, we have devised an experiment that we want to try based upon what we're seeing going on with you. And so we have another person here that you didn't know was here that we also were monitoring her brainwaves, and we would like you to come in and be in the room with her. So they had her in a recliner, and so they asked me to stand next to this woman and to do whatever I felt to do around her. Just put my hands anywhere around her, not touching her, but just all around her. And what they discovered was that I was altering her brainwave patterns. And what I later discovered was that she was a person who was clinically depressed and been depressed for years and was on antidepressant medication for years. And what they saw was that the brainwave patterns that I had that they had never seen before, that her brain began to entrain those same patterns. And not only did it begin to entrain the same patterns, that for 15 to 20 minutes afterwards, and I was out of the room, it continued to get stronger in her brainwave pattern. And I was later told that she went off her antidepressant medication, was off the medication without depression for months at a time. So this was my introduction to the brainwave research as altered states of consciousness as it relates to healing. Well, the interesting part of this, and the reason why I told this introductory to this story, is that later on, that was 1988, in 1991, and I became good friends with this doctor. In 91, he came down with a really rare case and very aggressive case of leukemia. And he was given a short period of time to live, like a few months. And I was living high in the mountains in southern Colorado. He was up near Boulder, Colorado, if you know anything Colorado. That's northwest, a little northwest of Denver. And I just felt very strongly one afternoon on a Friday to go and find him and where he was staying, which I did, and I spent the weekend with him. And during that weekend, he let me know that on Monday, he was going in for a very aggressive form of chemotherapy. And he said to me, Roger, it's going to destroy my bone marrow. It's going to completely wipe out my bone marrow. And I need you to come after that happens to help me regrow my bone marrow. So I said to Ed, I said, well, Ed, if, you're scientifically trained, that if you can make this leap that I can come back and help you regrow your bone marrow, can you make the leap that maybe we can get rid of the leukemia and you don't go through the chemotherapy? And his response was, well, I don't know if it's my training or my fear, but I've decided to go through the chemotherapy. So I went back to my home and he went to the hospital. So eight weeks went by. And several times during those 8 weeks, I called the hospital to talk to him. And either no one answered the phone or they would connect me with the wrong room, but for 8 weeks I could not contact him. So one morning, very early in the morning, I just felt compelled to go to the hospital, and I got up, and it was like 5 in the morning, and my wife woke up and asked me, well, what are you doing? Well, about that time, she had already met me when we first met, that I had already gone crazy, so she was accustomed to me just leaving, and doing things that seemed to be crazy to most people. But I was getting up, and I had about a 4-hour drive to Denver. She made breakfast for me, I packed my bag, and I left for the hospital in Denver. So when I arrived and I found his room and I walked in, his partner Bernice had her back turned to me. And I saw Ed on the hospital bed, which was lowered to his lowest level, and he was lying on his right side. And this is a man that was 6'2", 6'3", and probably normally around 240, 250 pounds, and he was white as a sheet and skin and bones. And so Bernice heard somebody come in, and she basically did a triple take, and then she said, well, I don't know why I should be surprised that you're here. You always know when to show up, and Ed's dying. And they're going to be moving him into ICU, and he's been on so much morphine, I don't even know if he would recognize you now, but if you have anything you want to say to him, you better do it now. So I went over and I knelt on the floor, and I was eyeball to eyeball with him, but his eyes were closed. And I said, Ed, and he slowly opened his eyes and he was looking at me, and I said, it's Roger, do you recognize me? And he immediately took his left hand and he planted it on my forehead, and I put my right hand on his left shoulder, and immediately there was a heat that was present. Just very, very powerful heat, almost unbearable for about maybe 20, 30 seconds, and then his arm just collapsed. And then they wheeled him out and headed for ICU, and I turned to Bernice, and I said, Bernice, I don't know if I'm here to help him stay or if I'm here to help him go. I'm going to go sit in the waiting room and see what comes to me. And so she left and went with Ed to the ICU area. And I went into the waiting room, and they had a big fish tank, and I was sitting there, and I was just sitting. I wasn't thinking, I was just trying to get a sense or a feeling of which way I was going. And after about 15 minutes, I had a strong feeling that I wanted to spend the night with him in ICU. So I got up and started walking down the hall, and here came Bernice down the hall, and she stopped me and said, I was talking to Ed's doctor, and he said, if you wanted to spend the night with him in ICU, you could. And I said, well, that was what I was coming for. So that evening, in the ICU room, how many of you have been in the hospital in ICU? Have you ever seen one of those rooms? Many times there's a central nursing station, and they have the rooms that are around the nursing station. You have sliding glass doors, and then have drapes that they can pull across the door to give some privacy. Well, when the drape is retracted, there's an area that you really can't see in the corner, and there was a recliner there. So this is now about probably 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And so I go in and I'm sitting in the recliner. And Ed was completely unconscious. he was aware, but he wasn't aware. So I'm sitting in the room with him, and he would wake up occasionally, and he was incoherent. I mean, I couldn't understand what he was saying. And it was sometime around 11 o'clock at night, 11:30 at night, well, maybe it was early, maybe around 10. He woke up and he was looking out of the door and he could see that there were people and he said, "Who are they?" And that's when I told him where he was and what was going on, and then he collapsed again. And then about an hour later he woke up again and he was totally awake. And I looked at him and I said, "Ed, how are you doing?" He said, "I don't know what to do next." And I said, "Well, do you remember you asked me to come and help you regrow your bone marrow? Are you ready to do that?" And he shook his head in the affirmative, and then he went to sleep again. He collapsed. So I sat in the corner, and I just sat and cleared my mind of all thought. But I had set an intention, and my intention was to help him in whatever way that needed to be helped. And I didn't know if his bone marrow would start working or not. I just know that it wasn't working. So then about an hour later, this doctor walks in. At the time I assumed he was a doctor, and he was. He walked in and with his stethoscope around his neck. And he stopped and he took Ed's vital signs. And he stood there for a while and he was holding Ed's hand. And then he turned and he saw me sitting in the corner. In all the years that I've been doing this, and this was early on when I started working this way, I've never had a doctor say this. He looked at me and he said, "Are you here to help?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, anything that you can do would be greatly appreciated because he's dying. And he has a bowel obstruction." He started telling me all the medical stuff that was going on with Ed. And he said, "There's nothing that we can do." And his bone marrow is definitely not working, so he has no immune system. So the evening continued, the doctor left, and it was around 5:30 in the morning. A nurse came in and withdrew some blood from Ed. And about an hour later, the same doctor came in and was all excited and very animated and woke Ed up and said, Ed, we have signs your bone marrow is working." Well, this was the head of oncology. He was a close friend of Ed's and had known him for years. So it stunned medical science at that point, because this is the only way that you can actually get your bone marrow working again is do a bone marrow transplant. And that didn't happen, but because they weren't going to do a bone marrow transplant because he was too weak for that to happen, and that would kill him. So I was there for about another hour, and as I was leaving, Bernice was coming down the hall, and I said to her, "Well, it seems to me Ed has made the decision to stay." And so I left. So Ed recovered. He was in the hospital for about another 2 months, 2.5 months, and he recovered. And he changed his research from altered states of consciousness and healing to unconditional loving and healing. And he started working more with HeartMath Institute in San Francisco, which is studying the brain and heart connection. He also was connected with the Monroe Institute on the East Coast, which had to do with sound and healing. So he became more and more interested in not so much the brain waves as it relates to healing, but maybe that would measure something. But he was still trying to figure out what in the world did they capture with me, that they had never seen it. So he wrote a research paper to get a grant to basically investigate what they had found about me, and he had shared it with basically the father of biofeedback, Dr. Joe Kamea. And I met Joe. He came and did some experiments with me. But what began to happen was that there was more and more investigation of from Ed's view of unconditional loving. And one of the things he said to me, he said, "You know, Roger, the way you work with people is you leave no trace of you behind. You leave no fingerprints. You leave no footprints. There's no way of knowing that you were even there, that you are a catalyst." And if you know anything in chemistry, that a catalyst is described as an agent that's added to the ingredients, which either speeds up or retards a reaction, but in the final product, there's nothing of the catalyst there. So now 3 years goes by, 3.5 years go by, and Ed has a recurrence of the leukemia. And he had already told me after the first experience that the chemotherapy was so invasive and so painful, and it felt like his bones were twisting in his body, that he would never do that again. But he was at peace. The first time that he had the leukemia, he was not at peace. This time he was at peace with allowing things to unfold in a way which would mean his death, his physical death. So I was with him one afternoon and I drove him down out of the mountains to the hospital for a blood transfusion. And Ed, to describe Ed, he's like a crusty old mountain man. is one of those people that had a heart of gold, but you had to get through the crust to get to it. And he had his demeanor and his personality, he didn't mince words. I mean, he told you exactly how he felt at all times. So I'm driving him down, and I said to him, I said, Ed, you've been trying to tell me something for the past day and a half, and you've been beating around the bush, and that's not like you. What is it that you're trying to tell me? And he said, Roger, you have an ability, you have a talent that is extraordinary. And he said, my advice to you is don't hold back. Jump in with both feet. Don't hold back. And I'm thinking, this guy's telling me not to hold back? This is a guy who had a very successful medical practice in Tennessee. And he had an epiphany. He went through a divorce, sold his big house, got rid of his expensive car, sold his boat, and began working with poor people in the Appalachian Mountains, had created clinics in the Appalachian Mountains, got interested into altered states of consciousness and healing, and the altered states part of it. He was in the University of Tennessee in the medical school. He would get a couple of the medical students and train them on how to do CPR, because he was going to give himself ketamine to alter his brain waves, and it might stop his heart, and if it did, he wanted to make sure they knew how to get his heart started. I mean, this guy would use himself as a guinea pig, and he's telling me, he said, I've held back all my life, and I've lived to regret it, so please don't hold back. So in that experience, in the sense, there was another indication that what I was doing was connecting at a level that I still to this day don't know what he means by jump in with both feet, don't hold back. I have a hint of what it is, and that's what Swami's been talking about the mind. Not about consciousness, but about the mind. And the mind, and I agree with doubt. Doubt, and I view doubt as a way of keeping myself sane. I question it. I question what I'm doing. I question what my intention is. I question how I'm living my life. But I don't let, doubt is, in my view, doubt is only delaying the inevitable. And that is, I know what my decision's going to be. I know what I'm going to do. But I'm in my mind, I'm caught up in my mind right now. And at some point I start laughing, and I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow my heart wherever it leads me. And when I say my heart, I'm talking about a knowing that we are all connected, knowing that we're not separate, knowing that there's a stream and a flow, if we will even look at that way, or a presence that we're all immersed in and we're not separate from. So these experiences that I've had in healing, quote unquote, healing situations, and if you remember from yesterday, I said my view is that there are no healers. There are people who can help facilitate the healing process. So it's a two-way street. So in the sense of this story about Ed, I got so much more out of that. I know he got a lot out of it, but I got so much more out of it because of my relationship was in a deep, intimate space with him during this time that was going on, and it was quite profound. So another story, which is not as dramatic in the sense of that story about Ed, is that many years ago I was called by a woman in Ventura, California. She was in her 70s and had a rare form of cancer called hairy cell leukemia. It's a slow-growing cancer. It will kill you. And she was wanting to know if I would come out and see her, which I did. I flew out and had my own expense and went up and spent time with her. And I spent about 8 or 9 hours with her the first day, and then two or 3 days later I spent another 8 or 9 hours with her. And all we did was sit and talk. We just sat and talked. We talked about life. We talked about consciousness. We talked about the infinite being that we are. And we went through a lot of layers of discussions that would be in what would be considered in levels of the mind, and stripping them away in the sense of just sharing our lives. And after the second day, I did work on her physically, like I described it with Gerald. I stood behind her, put my hands on my head, and just got myself out of the way, and was just being present with her. A little over a month passed, and I got an excited email from her, and then her husband was an electrical engineer and was very scientifically oriented as well. And but they were on their way. With the story she sent me was that they were on their way to get her blood test, her monthly blood test. And she said to him, you know, it really doesn't matter to me if I have leukemia. It really doesn't matter to me anymore. My life has changed since talking to Roger, and I'm so happy and living in a particular way that I've embraced everything around me, the making coffee or making breakfast or driving the car, but being totally present that in this space of what you were talking about, Swami, that this is consciousness, this is what we're in, this is moving through this ever-present consciousness. And she didn't put it that way to her husband, but she basically said, it's okay, if I still have leukemia, it's okay. If I don't have it, it's okay too. So what happened was that she had the first normal blood results in 10 years. No leukemia. None at all. So what was shocking to her was that she came to the realization when she let go of it, when she let go of the fear of having it, when she let go of the thoughts of getting rid of it, when she just got rid of any kind of concern about whether she has it or not, and was just present with whatever was going to transpire, it went away. And of course then the challenge is, when it goes away, you get trapped into, whoa, wait a minute, let's see if we can recreate this for somebody else. Seeing it, there's this razor's edge of dropping into seeing it as a cure instead of a healing. The healing happened because we weren't talking about the leukemia in the 2 days I spent with her. What we talked about was about living and about life and about the expression of life and the interconnectedness. And that what shows up physically is not important. Not all that important. Yes, it can be a nuisance, but it's really in the essence of what is. It's not that important. So I would say to you, the transformative effect of the healing consciousness is in this journey and this reminder, this constant reminder, in extreme circumstances sometimes, I mean very extreme circumstances, of being reminded on a regular basis of this connection, that there's no separation. And this reminder, and also hopefully passing on the idea to others, is that we heal ourselves. Our journey in life, we can say, well, we're spiritual seekers. Well, maybe we're spiritual healers of ourselves. That healing is healing ourselves in such a way that we become more and more connected to each other. Because we see what's happening in the world today, and there's a lot of violence and a lot of division and a lot of suffering, and of course suffering, again, I'm sure it's been talked about before, suffering is of the mind. You know, pain is of the body and suffering is of the mind. And when I'm working with people in extreme pain, it's kind of hard to talk about that this is of the mind and it's not of what, in the essence of who you are. But one of the stories I tell is that, I don't know if any of you have Labrador retrievers, but you know, Labrador retrievers love to chase sticks and balls and frisbees and everything. And I had one who that's all he wanted to do. You could put a stake on the ground, or you could put a frisbee on the ground. He's going to pick up the frisbee. He's going to forget the stake. He wants to play. Well, on this island we have this tree that's called a madrona, and it's like ironwood, like teak. It's very dense and heavy and thick. And he had this part of a branch that was about that big around and about this long, and he dropped it at my feet, and I would throw and he would go get it. Well, one time I threw it and he caught it in the air and he bit through his tongue. And he yelped and he came back and he dropped this madrona branch at my feet. And he's got his butt up in the air and that tail is wagging and he's waiting for me to throw it again and blood's dripping out of his mouth. Well, you know, he experienced pain, but he wasn't suffering. If he had been suffering, he probably would have bitten me on the ankle and said, "You SOB, you made me bite through my tongue. Here, I'm going to give you something." No, he just wanted me to throw the branch again. It didn't matter to him that he bit through his tongue. So for me in my life, that when I have things going on with me or with a loved one, is that I'm always reminded of that, with that example with, I called him Fred, and Frederick in Norwegian translates to peace. And he was one of the most peaceful animals I think I'd ever met. So I'm reminded that I experience pain, my loved ones experience pain, and the question is, are you suffering? Because there is a way of looking at it that you can embrace the pain, you can experience the pain and not suffer. And that's one of the things that I've seen in some of these extreme circumstances, or you see someone like the helicopter pilot that was cut open from below his neck to his navel and had been stapled closed and was hooked up to all kinds of tubes. And Peter was not suffering, but the people around him were, because of their fears of losing him and the fears of what might happen without him. And so it's working in that field of suffering that's created by the minds of the individuals that are around the person in the bed. And it's working in many different ways, not only with the person that's in the ICU unit, but it's also with the family. So I think that we have like 4 minutes or so. Anybody have a question? Or would you like the break? That's all yours, Paul. Oh, there's a question. You would ruin it for us, wouldn't you? I was ready for the break.
Thanks, Roger. Question is, you mentioned follow your heart and communicate through the heart. Just trying to think, what does that mean? Is it? Can you elaborate on that, please?
Well, of course, the heart's a pump. Well, when I speak of the heart, I'm talking about a strong inner sense of the self. It's a place of intimacy. It's a place of being vulnerable. It's being vulnerable and open without any fear of any retaliation or what might someone do with the information that you're giving them. But that communication can also be, in a sense, without speaking. It's just being present. It's being present at a level where you are connected with the other person. And you're connected at a level that has no words. But even if you speak, it's speaking from a place of intimacy. And a place, as an example, I'm sure you've experienced loss in your life. And if you have, let's say, a dear friend, let's say they've lost the spouse, or they've lost the daughter, or lost the son, there are no words, right? I mean, there are no words to say to them. There are no words to give them. But just being present, just being there, and maybe hugging them, or sitting next to them, or holding their hand, is that place of heart, is a place of intimacy and vulnerability and sharing that is truly felt by another individual. That's what I mean by heart. Oh, another question? Okay, one more question. I'm not going to let you keep me from a break.
I'll make this a very long
Oh,
question.
okay. All right.
The stories, I have never heard stories like those that you've told us yesterday and today. Amazing, powerful stories. And you have been given gifts and used them in phenomenal ways. Do you know of other people? Do you know of others who, like you, have been gifted and are capable of using those gifts or willing to use those gifts as you use them?
You.
Everyone.
Everyone. And I don't see it as a gift. And what I mean by that is, if I view it as a gift, then I start thinking about, well, who gave it to me? And then if I think about it, if somebody gave me a gift, then it can be taken away. And then I can get in the mindset of, well, I'm worried about if the gift is going to be taken away. So I don't view it as a gift. I view it as an innate thing that exists within all of us. And it's, I have people who come to me. I've worked with thousands of people in counseling sessions and things like that, they've come to me, and when many of them will say, oh, I hate to leave. I really enjoy this conversation that we're having, that I can't find other people to talk to about this. And I said, the person before you said that, and the person after you is going to say that. So the question is, why aren't you talking to each other? And it's because people aren't willing to do it. They're not willing to be intimate and open and be in that place of compassion. But that's the place I'm talking about, is that it's there with everybody, because again, people don't heal other people. You heal yourself. So if you embrace the healing journey that you're on, then what you'll find is that you'll be connected with other people who are doing the same thing. And hopefully that will grow. But yes, you're one of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. And for those of you who don't know, we are DVDing this, and the DVD DVD will be made available for $20 and a $5 shipping charge. If you're interested, please sign up. And now we will take a break, and we will be forewarned by the gong, so stay tuned. We'll be back here at 12 noon. The next speaker is going to be Dr. Janice Holden, and she is going to be speaking on what near-death experiences teach us about life and death.
Hey. Well, overnight I thought about a couple of things that I neglected to say yesterday that I want to start with today and then go on talking about addressing this topic. One of the things was this sparked, we were having a conversation just now that sparked this memory for me. I was talking about after effects of near-death experiences, and I neglected to mention that one of the after effects can be psychokinesis, the ability to move objects without touching them. And there's a near-death experiencer named Sherry Lee Black who has demonstrated in 3 different laboratories this ability. They take a pinwheel that's on a little metal rod and put a glass dome over it so that there's no air current or anything like that that can be affecting it. And she just takes her hand and goes like this, and the pinwheel turns with her hand. And then she goes like this, and it turns back. And she's just hovering around the dome. So it's just an illustration of the kinds of things that can happen sometimes in the aftermath of near-death experiences. I also neglected to talk about the experience of leaving and re-entering the body. Some near-death experiencers have the experience of leaving and or re-entering. And when they leave, there isn't just one uniform way. Some will say they left through their chest, some through their forehead, some through the crown, and one person through their feet. And similarly with returning, and sometimes it's just a whole body lifting out sensation. And similarly with returning. And another thing that I want to be sure and mention is about the decision to return. About half of near-death experiencers say that they were going along in the near-death experience and then suddenly they were just back in their body. It was like a very abrupt, with no forewarning, and it's just over. And then the other half say that they made a decision or chose to return. And I should say, among those people who just were back in the body, there also is a group in that group who didn't actually choose, who were told that they must come back. And sometimes people argue, and one near-death experiencer named Kimberly Clark Sharp, she's a social worker, and she, in her near-death experience, she met this light that she perceived to be God. And when it came time, this light communicated to her that she had to go back, that she still had work to do. And she said, no, I'm not. And she said, the light said, yes, you are. And she said, no, I'm not. And she said, you see who won. So, but the other half of people choose, and when I say choose, I mean that I don't mean it in exactly the way that you might think immediately. They are aware that they manifested their return to physical life. And most often the way that it happens is that they're going along in their NDE, and at some point their attention is directed to still living people. And the NDEer thinks about what effect their physical death is going to have on this person. And in this moment of loving empathy for what the loss will mean to them, the person is back in their body. And I have one friend, Linda, a near-death experiencer. She had this experience. She was 5 years old, drowned, and was rescued, of course. But in her NDE, she saw her brother, Bobby, and she saw how it would devastate his life because he was supposed to have been watching her, and he wasn't watching her, and that's how she fell in the river and drowned. And she saw how it would devastate his life if she didn't survive. And in that moment, she was back in her body. And she said, you know, if I realized that thinking about that was going to have that effect, I might have thought twice, but because it's really good there, and people don't tend to want to come back. One of my doctoral students has read, as part of a project that we've done, she's read every referee journal article that's ever been published on near-death experiences. And I asked her when she finished if she had ever encountered a story in which someone came back not out of loving empathy. And she thought, and she said no. In every case, it had to do with this sense of connection and love and empathy that resulted in the person returning to their body. So one of that kind of transitions into the theme, which is, you know, about the transformative effects, and that a lot of near-death experiencers say sometimes directly in these words, but sometimes in different words, but meaning this same theme, that essentially in life there is one thing that matters, and it's love. Love is all that matters. They perceive the purpose of life to advance in their capacity to love, and as a secondary purpose, learning seems to be important, that we acquire knowledge. So loving and learning is really what it's all about. But I thought I would tell you 3 stories of transformation, and hopefully I'll have enough time for all 3 of these. The first is Tony Sikoria. He was an orthopedic surgeon and an adult in a very successful practice, married with a couple of children, and probably 40 years old or so when this happened. He was out at a family picnic, and his mother hadn't been able to come because she wasn't feeling well. So in the middle of the picnic, he went over to the payphone, if you're old enough to remember that phenomenon, and to call and check on her. And while he was standing there talking to her, lightning came and struck, and he was struck by lightning through the payphone. And he was dead. And fortunately, there was someone nearby who was a medical person that was very responsible for his having been revived. But prior to his near-death experience, he had no interest in music whatsoever. And when he was like 7 or 8 years old, his mother had made him take piano lessons, and after a couple of months, he begged her, please let me stop because I hate this. And she's like, okay. And so he had no interest. Within a couple of weeks of getting home from the hospital, because obviously being struck by lightning, he was in the hospital for a little while, he began to feel a compulsion to listen to classical piano music. So he started buying all this music and listening to it. And then he developed a compulsion to learn how to play classical piano. And a little part of his story is another theme, a transformative theme that comes up for NDEers. And that is that just at the time that he was realizing, I really want to learn how to play, the first thing was he needed to have a piano to practice on, and he didn't have the first idea how to get one. And that day or the day after, his housekeeper came to clean the house and announced that her husband had been transferred to another city, so she was going to be leaving in a couple of weeks. And she said to Tony, do you know, she said, we've got this old upright piano. Do you have any idea of anybody who might want it? And he's like, me. And so these kind of synchronicities, near-death experiencers say that their lives are rich with synchronicities, with these coincidences that actually convey that there's something more going on beneath the surface that has to do with purpose. And so he eventually learned to play piano. Then he became compelled to compose music, and he said that what happens when he's asleep at night, it's like music gets downloaded into him, and in the morning he has to write it, or it's like kind of it bothers him and weighs on him and preoccupies him during the day, and so he had to learn how to write music. So he listens to it, he plays it, he writes it. And his first composition he called the Lightning Sonata. And so his story, if you're interested, is the first chapter of the book Musicophilia by Oliver Sacks, who recently died himself. And I often wonder, because Oliver took a very philosophically materialist view, and he said that the lightning strike just changed things in Tony's brain, and that's why he became so focused on music. But Tony himself says, back to the subjective experience, he says it's not that. Or maybe there's some of that, but this really was a spiritual opening. It really opened channels whereby he receives information and inspiration. And now that Oliver has died, I wonder if he's maybe changed his mind. Another story I want to tell you about is Mary Neal. She also is an orthopedic surgeon. They're the only two I know, so I don't think that orthopedic surgeons are particularly vulnerable to these kind of disasters. But in her case, she was successful. She had been actually director of an orthopedic unit at a major hospital in California, but then she and her husband and their children moved to Colorado. And her oldest child was, I think, about 8 at this time, and she and her husband took a trip to South America. They were kayakers, and they had some friends who took people to South America on these kayaking trips, and they decided to go on one of them, so a week-long thing. And one day, her husband woke up with back pain that he had never had before and has never had since, but it prevented him from going out on the river that day. And so she went ahead, and long story short, her kayak went over a waterfall and became lodged in some rocks at the base of the waterfall, underwater. She's about 10 feet underwater. And the force of the water coming down prevented her. She said she couldn't even move her arms to pull the apron string that would release her from the kayak. Eventually, she was sucked out of the kayak. And sorry to be so graphic, but she was, if you can imagine, her legs are like this, and she was sucked out this way, so it broke her kneecaps. It hyperextended her legs the wrong way and broke her kneecaps and all that. Anyway, she had a very profound near-death experience. She estimates now, based on reconstructing all the events that happened, that she was underwater continuously for 28 minutes. She was dead, absolutely physically dead. No oxygen, so she just drowned. And but she obviously was resuscitated, and there are numerous miracles associated with her story. But the part that I wanted to tell you about is that in her near-death experience, let me pause here for a second. Go back 3 years before. She's having a conversation with her then 5-year-old son, her oldest child. And they're talking about something, and she says something about when he grows up. And he says, well, Mom, you know, I'm not going to live past 18. And she's like, what? Well, in her near-death experience 3 years later, she was shown that indeed he was going to die before his 18th birthday. And this was kind of bittersweet because on the one hand, obviously, she was going to really miss him. And on the other hand, she was in this state of absolute joy, reunited with spiritual entities who felt like her oldest best friends, and seeing this city of light that she was approaching but didn't enter, that was very attractive, and so she knew that he was going to be here. And so one of the things that happened in her near-death experience, she encountered Jesus, and they had a talk, and he conveyed to her that he wanted her to tell her story when she came back, which is a common theme among near-death experiencers. So but when she came back, she did not want to come back. She had the sense that her husband and her children would be just fine, and she could stay there if she wanted to. But she chose to come back. I'm not really sure if she chose, but she didn't want to publish her story because she was afraid if her children knew that she really didn't want to come back, that they would feel really rejected. So she waited until they were older, about 10 years. And she took about 9 months, I think, to write her book. And the day that she pressed the send button to send the last chapter to the publisher, 3 hours later, her phone rang, and she learned that her son had been killed in a car accident. And she talks very openly about how she both grieved and didn't grieve. And that people really questioned why she wasn't more, falling apart than she was. And it was because she knew where her son was. And she also had learned many things in her near-death experience. Among them was, for a couple of weeks after when she was hospitalized, she was unable to see anything except she opened a Bible and she turned the page, and there was one passage that she was able to physically see. And the passage is something like, take joy in all things. And so she, at a recent Near-Death Association conference, she talked about taking joy in her son's death, which seems so paradoxical. But she talked about all the beautiful things that came out of her son's death that never would have happened if he hadn't died. And so it really transforms people in terms of their experience of losing other people to physical death. It changes the grief process. And the last story that I want to tell you about is, and by the way, Mary Neal, if you would like to read her story, she has written a book. I can't remember the title, but it has the word heaven in it, and she spells her last name Neal. So if you just Google her and Mary Neal and heaven, you'll get to her book, and it's very worth reading. Also, who has written a book is Anita Moorjani. And Anita is from Hong Kong. She's of Indian descent, heritage. And about, I think, 10 or 12 years ago, she was in end-stage lymphoma. She had tumors all over the top half of her body. And some of them, she said, as large as lemons. And she was, on the morning that she went to the hospital, she didn't wake up. She was in a coma. And she was very wasted. She weighed like 80 pounds or something. And she was definitely dying. So she went to the hospital. The physician said that her organs were shutting down and she was within hours of dying. So her husband was there, her parents were there. Many things happened in her near-death experience, but the part that I really want to focus on, talking about transformative effects, is that at one point in her NDE, she's with a spiritual entity, and they're looking down on on her body in the hospital, and her family's there. And this is near the end of the near-death experience. And just as they're watching a physician or nurse come in and draw blood to continue to monitor her organ shutdown, this entity conveys to her that she has a choice about whether she wants to live or die, physically, that is, whether she wants to stay here or go back to that body. And her first response is, well, they just came and drew blood. And so, whether I live or die is already, it's in the syringe. And the spiritual entity conveyed to her, no, depending on how you decide, that's how the results are going to come out. And so, I don't know about you, but this just twisted my sense of reality. We think you draw the blood, the answer is in there, it's going to come out in the tests. And what this entity was saying is that intention can change physical reality. And so she decided to live, long story short, obviously, or we wouldn't be here talking about this. And indeed, when the blood test results came back, they were all excited because it showed suddenly, spontaneously, that her organs were coming back. And she proceeded to heal. When she regained consciousness, she knew that she was going to survive this and have, what in medicine is called spontaneous remission. That means they don't have an explanation, but everything works out great. And over the course of 10 days, her tumors just melted. And she was on chemotherapy. They insisted on putting her on it, and she was kind of like, okay, if you must, it's up to you, but that's not going to have anything to do with anything. And they've never seen, of course, chemotherapy work this way. And her case has been studied by physicians and cancer centers around the world, and I've seen her actual admission form that lists all her tumors. It's just full of stuff. And then her release form 2 weeks later that is blank. It's like there's nothing left. And so she is, her consciousness has been transformed, knowing that intention and mindset are very, very powerful things. So I'm seeing a lot of the themes in the three of us speakers. We're coming from very different places, and yet I keep seeing many of the same themes in the things that we're talking about: the importance of love, and the importance of mindset and intention, and that those phenomena have effects in the world. And then if we circle back to near-death experiencers, they believe that each of our lives has purpose. And the purpose is to advance in our capacity to love and to acquire knowledge, and that we can harness the power of love and manage our mindsets, as Roger's been talking about how he does on a regular basis, not letting ourselves get boxed in ways that limit our potential to be of service in the world. And that is another theme of near-death experiencers, that a big purpose, the way we manifest love primarily, is through service. And so I think with that, I'll stop and see if we have... Oh, and I don't think I have a question, but I have a couple of minutes, right? I have 5 minutes, so if anybody wants to ask something, yeah.
So, a couple of examples you gave yesterday and today. In in all of them there was one recurring theme. So for example, one who grew up with Christianity as the faith, they saw Jesus there. This third example you gave today, she saw some spirits there. Now, this is where, when the mainstream science comes into picture and they say that maybe it was just another dream which was going on in their mind, because, it sounds like a very big coincidence that people who grew up with Christianity will see Jesus and somebody else will see something else. How would you explain that?
Thank you. That's a great question. So one of the things I did one time just to kind of amuse myself is I found all the near-death experiences that I could find in which the experiencer encountered Jesus physically and described his appearance. And so it might be interesting to you to know that Jesus is 5 feet tall and he's 8 feet tall and he's taller than can be measured. He has brown hair, he has light hair, he has blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes, eyes that project light. He's all these kinds of things. Well, I think the key to understanding this comes from actually 3 near-death experiences. These are people who never met each other, but they encountered the same thing in their near-death experience, and it was essentially that right before they met Jesus, they were with a spiritual entity, and the spiritual entity said, Jesus wants to meet with you. How would you like him to appear? So we create for ourselves in that state of consciousness, I gather, the forms that we'll be able to deal with so that we're able to focus on the message and not on the form that the messenger takes. So every near-death experience is unique, but it also reflects this underlying pattern. And the forms are always unique to each person. But there are still some underlying themes that are universal to all near-death experiences. And it seems like there's something else that I want to say about this. It's just flown right out of my mind. So, yeah, maybe I'll think about it. Yes.
Have you explored the power of the subconscious mind? We actually have a fellow devotee in this very town who is cancer-free in 7 months because she couldn't stand chemo and her doctors had pretty much said she was gone. And the learning we're going through is literally training the subconscious mind for that intent and literally accomplishing anything you want, and that is synonymous with godliness. Is that something that you've explored in your research?
Well, I haven't explored it, and I don't know anyone who has, because it is a pretty focused, but obviously a very important aspect of the phenomenon. But I do think we're very powerful. We're much more powerful than we realize. And I also think that there's a phenomenon of kind of New Age guilt that if somebody dies, the idea that, well, they weren't really exercising or using their power. But, you know, we're as far as I know, maybe this is too much of a box that I'm putting myself in, but so far everybody has died, and there may be times, there may be higher wisdom at work about whether we live or die as well. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Now we're going to have a fireside chat. I'm hoping that those of you who are in the back will be able to see us because we'll all be seated. And these are the questions that you have written down, so it's coming from you. And stay tuned, we have a little surprise at the end. Roger and Jan, your spiritual narratives have been through stories of healings and NDEs. What is it about storytelling that inspires us spiritually and can even transform us? Can you speak from your personal experience? And Swami, can you add to that from the perspective of the Vedanta tradition?
never actually thought about this question, but I'm just reminded about how I was raised in a Christian tradition, and so that's what I'm just most familiar with, and that Jesus spoke through parables. And my understanding is that that the power of parable is that people can relate to them and can make meaning out of them because they are concrete, and one can sort of empathize. So that's my first thought.
Would you read that first part again?
Your spiritual narratives, adventure stories, stories of healings and NDAs, what is it about storytelling that inspires us spiritually and can even transform us?
I don't know. But sharing the stories, did you feel the stories? I mean, could you resonate with them?
Yes.
Now, one of the things that I say to people is that I may say something to you that you may not understand or you may not agree with, but if you feel it, if it resonates with you and you feel it, then I ask you to pay attention to it and investigate it. So the answer is I can only share my stories, and I hope that it has some inspiration. I hope that it has some message that people feel.
Well, as she just said, Jesus taught through parables, and Ramakrishna also taught through parables. They told a lot of stories. And I just say this, how stories work. There's a way of understanding through philosophy, there's a way of understanding through experience, meditative experience. That's mostly what Vedanta speaks about, yoga and Advaita Vedanta, Vichara, the path of philosophical inquiry. But stories, in Hinduism you have a vast range of stories called Puranas. And they are stories to convey the same Vedantic truth through myth, through mythology. One thing I remember, many years ago, I used to read a lot of Vivekananda as a kid, as a school kid, because the books were lying around in the house, and that was before television and internet and all that. So I used to read a lot. But after becoming a monk, I remember once I was telling a friend, another monk, oh, I read a lot of Vivekananda earlier as a kid, but now I see that I did not understand it at that time. Now I'm beginning to understand. And you know what he said? He said, what is important, you understood at that time. Not with here maybe, but in here. That you understood, that you liked it, it pulled you and it transformed you. Today you are here as a monk. That's more important than what you're understanding now is through head. Okay.
Swami, the Kena Upanishad dialogue that is given by, the Kena Upanishad dialogue sounds similar for Zen dialogues between teacher and student. Is there this similarity?
Yes, definitely on the surface there's a lot of similarity, and in depth too. For example, in the Kena Upanishad we did not go there, but you will have things like the one who says he has understood has not understood. The one who does not understand does understand. It is known to the one who does not know it. It is unknown to the one who knows it. Paradoxical language. A little bit of that we saw. It is other than the known and it's other than the unknown. It is the eye of the eye, the ear of the ear, the mind of the mind, the speech of the speech, and so on. So this kind of paradoxical language one comes across in Zen Buddhism, where you're given a koan. The one difference I see, I have not practiced Zen myself, so I'm not fully qualified to compare the two. But the one difference I do see is, in Zen the strategy seems to be to short-circuit the intellect. It will give you a paradoxical statement which you keep rotating in your mind. What's the sound of one hand clapping? You heard the sound of two hands clapping in the example. But what's the sound of one hand clapping? And you think about that again and again till it catapults you sort of beyond the intellect into the truth which cannot be expressed through words or through intellect. That seems to be the strategy in Zen. That's not quite the strategy in Advaita Vedanta. You are not supposed to stop thinking. In fact, you have to go beyond the intellect to realize the Atman, But the path is not by stopping the intellect, it's through the intellect. In fact, everything that the Kena Upanishad says has a very precise meaning which can be understood. It may not be expressible easily, but one can understand it very clearly. With the intellect, one can understand what it means. So the inner strategy is a bit different. On the surface, they are definitely very similar.
There seems to be a parallel between the physical signs of spiritual states of consciousness experienced by seers and those who experience near-death experiences. With seers, it is called kumbhaka. The pulse ceases to exist. There is no response to the eyeball being touched, such as in Sri Ramakrishna's case when he was in samadhi. And for NDEs, the patient flatlines. There seems to be a clear distinction between consciousness and life as we know it. Please comment.
Yes. I'm not sure that this is going to address. First, I want to say that in near-death experiences, not all near-death experiences occur during flatline. That's the most extreme condition, but some people have absolutely nothing physical ever happens to them. They'll have what we call a fear-death experience. And maybe that actually does relate because I think that these kinds of experiences can occur in a variety of circumstances. Perhaps being physically close to death is the most reliable way to get to this alternative reality, but it's not the only way. And as I said yesterday, my current thinking is that the process is facilitated by being in an extreme state. Physically, near death is extreme, but also emotional extremes, whether something like elation or anger or depression, other physical extremes like physical exertion, and even intellectual extremes like encountering some problem that's impossible to resolve rationally. And that any of these kinds of circumstances can catapult someone into this other state of consciousness from which then arise amazing abilities.
Roger, would you like to comment?
No.
Sorry.
This one point was, last part of the question was, is consciousness different from life as we know it? I'll just answer from the point of view of Vedanta. In Vedanta, life as we know it is called prana. We speak about the pranamaya kosha. It's one of the 5 sheets which cover, quote unquote, cover the Atman. So consciousness is that which is conscious of life. Your breathing, the digestion of food in our body, the circulation of blood, all the physiological processes going on in the body are because of prana, according to Vedanta or other Indian philosophies. And consciousness is something distinct from them. So yes, consciousness is not equivalent to life.
Do you think that the near-death experience is an experience of the true self, Jan?
I don't know. Heaven maybe knows, but I don't know. I think to refer to concept that Swami has talked about this weekend, I think it's an experience of the subtle self without the physical body, and that it certainly fits it resonates for me to think that is the entity that reincarnates, but it's not the essence of identity. And I will say that there have been a couple of NDEers who progressed in the experience to the point that they encountered the being of light and had a sense of melding with it. And one of them he said that on the sort of edge of the being of light, he began to enter it, and where he entered it, he lost his sense of self. And I think he meant self in terms of the subtle self, that is like the personality and memories and all of that stuff. And he said that he progressed in it, but he kept a toe outside for fear that he would be completely lost if he let himself go in. There was another near-death experiencer who experienced himself merging entirely and then re-emerging back out as his subtle self. So that's the best that I can say, and I'm interested to know what you think.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you said that because that's the way I was thinking about it. Remember the three aspects of the human personality: the physical, the subtle, and the pure consciousness. You can subdivide it further also, but still, that's the essence. Here is the physical body, and there's the subtle body, the mind and the prana and everything else, and pure consciousness, which you or I am actually. And you can see all these experiences probably pertain to the subtle as free or almost free from the physical. That's why death is like a borderline, like a margin where these things might occur more and more. Have you noticed from all the accounts which Jan gave us, have you noticed how similar the NDEs are to dreams? Have you noticed that? A dream is where the subtle body is more or less free of the physical body. It still might be within the physical body, but you don't experience the physical body which is sleeping on the bed. So the subtle body becomes much more free. Right now the subtle body is very constrained by impulses from the world outside and from the physical body. So it has to behave, remain within this sphere. So in NDEs, when the physical body is damaged, dying, or even dead, medically speaking, the subtle body is free. And I'll speak more about that later.
And I want to say too, not to contradict, but just to clarify that I agree that there's a relationship between dreams and near-death experiences, and yet I would be doing a terrible disservice to near-death experiencers if I allowed the idea to persist that they are the same as dreams. I think there are levels of subtle experience, and one difference, as I mentioned yesterday, is that when I awaken from a dream, I know that that wasn't real in a sense. But near-death experiencers, by and large, are adamant that what they experienced was real. Also, dreams tend to be irrational, and things happen that don't make any sense and so forth. Whereas near-death experience narratives seem to be very make a lot of sense. There's a pattern, or and people are not, in dreams we have strong emotions, and in near-death experiences people tend to be experience equanimity. So there's some really important differences, and they're not dreams, they're not hallucinations.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. And I didn't want to equate dreams to near-death experiences, but I just wanted to say they're both in the subtle body, that's the important thing. But there's something that I wanted to say later, but I can say it right now. I think NDs are a very important input into Vedanta. You see, we speak about subtle bodies, but the nagging doubt still remains in this very materialistic, reductive worldview that we live in this world today, that this so-called subtle body could still be just a product of the physical body, right? So physiological processes are just what a living body does. And mind is something that's generated as an epiphenomenon of a living brain. That's it. When the living body dies, the subtle body also, if you call it a subtle body or whatever, it dies with it. That doubt could remain. And if you want empirical evidence to overrule that doubt, to settle that doubt, then NDEs are the way to go. This is very, very important, because whatever the veracity, whether it's veridical or not, whether the person actually saw Jesus or not, one thing is without doubt, even the most hard-boiled materialist cannot refute it, that in many cases the body is either dead or dying. And yet these people at that time are having very clear conscious experiences. Whereas the brain should be dysfunctional or not functional at all. So if the brain is producing these experiences, then how is the brain chugging away at full speed when the body is dying or dead? It's not very clear. If you have a purely body-based, physiology-based theory of consciousness, it doesn't compute already. And of course the question of veridical experiences which are truthful, which the person had no way of seeing, like you can hear the conversation between the anesthesiologist and the doctors when you are deep in anesthesia. How could that? Medical knowledge cannot explain that. So these are test cases where you have to rethink your paradigm. That's very important for Vedanta. Yeah.
And if you're interested in reading one case after another, like Swami was just talking about, this book was just published, The Self Does Not Die, and it's a collection of cases related to near-death experiences where there was verified paranormal phenomena, many of them occurring while the person was clearly clinically dead. So if you're interested.
Self does not die.
The Self Does Not Die.
I do have something to add here in relation to coma. Because the person is not dead, and the person is unresponsive, and in some cases that I've worked with, they're 98% brain damaged. So you have the medical view that they're so severely brain damaged that there's absolutely no way that they can be a functioning human being again. And the view is that who and what we are is created by the synaptic connections between our ears, called the brain, and that's so severely damaged, and since that's so severely damaged, who and what we are no longer exists. So there's the view then we'll pull life support and let this body go because there is no self anymore. So when an individual comes out of the coma, and they still have the medical evidence even after they're out of the coma that they're 98% brain damaged, yet they're walking, talking, eating, functioning, which then throws in the monkey wrench into the gears, because the view is if you're so badly damaged in your brain, there's a whole flowchart of decision making as to what happens. But if you are approaching it that who and what we are is not created by the brain but expresses itself through this body, then there's a whole other flowchart of decision making that goes on. And one of the things that was in New England, I was asked to, it was quite interesting, it was a Seventh-day Adventist hospital, and the administrator or the head of the hospital was Jewish. And he asked me to sit in on a luncheon, and the luncheon was to discuss a particular case that had happened years and years before, which was an elderly woman who was in a coma. And what they were debating was the cost of the hospital to keep her alive, and whether the quality versus quantity of life was discussed. And so there was this round table, and they had nurses in there, and they had doctors, and they had a chaplain. And so at the end of the hour, the administrator turned to me and said, "Do you have anything to say about this?" And I said, "Well, I sat here for an hour and observed that everyone talked about this woman at the time, but no one considered about talking to the woman, to ask her what she wanted to do." So it was probably later on that day I got a call from the administrator and said, "You know, what you said was so profound, and it really bothered a number of people in the room, but the one that was most upset was the chaplain." Because the chaplain said that he felt that all he could do was pray, and he never considered that there was another option of actually talking to her and trying to communicate with her. So there are places where I would say I guess it could be considered near death, but they're comatose. And in some instances there's brainwave action. There's quite a bit of brainwave action that's going on. And so these experiences do also occur, because there are people who have come out of coma that have had vivid experiences that are quite dramatic.
is there such a thing as positive trauma?
If you choose it to be.
Is the natural world seen or real, or does it come to existence when we become conscious of it? If yes, that means I am the only one to experience.
I wonder who asked this question. All right. I'm happy with the question because it's an easy one to answer. And it's easy to answer only in the sense it's a very bookish question. So all you need to do is Google these 3 words: realism, idealism, solipsism. Okay? These questions are like, does the world exist, this room exist without the observer? One question. And it seems straight away, yeah, it does. My car is there out in the parking lot, even if I'm sitting here. I mean, it better be. It doesn't pop into existence when I go out there. But it's not all that simple when you analyze it a little more closely. After all, what do you mean by the world? If the world is your experience of it, lights, sounds, sensations, forms, ideas, definitely it does not exist without you. What is it without your experiences? You have no idea. And we have no access to the world, what Kant called the thing in itself, without our categories of experience. So it's not as simple as that. The other side, idealism. Bishop Berkeley, for example, Berkeleyan idealism, 1,000 years before Berkeley, Vijnanavada Buddhism, subjective idealist Buddhism, the mind-only school of Buddhism, says that everything that you experience is actually only in your mind. It's not a copy of something outside. There's nothing outside. Whatever we experience, so the world pops into existence when you experience it. That's another school of thought, which is true. Debate is very, very old. It's not the debate between subjective idealism and realism in Western philosophy, which is a few hundred years old. If you go back to India, the Nayayika realists and the Buddhist idealists, they had more than 1,000 years of debate. What's the conclusion? It's still out. The question is still open. Whether is it mind or is it matter? Which is real? So the answer you get in the old joke in philosophy schools, philosophy classes is, what is matter? Never mind. What is mind? No matter. And finally, you as the only knower, in one sense you are right. You don't even have to theorize about it. Who else is a knower here? You say that, right, all of these people are knowers, but only in your knowledge. You don't experience it from our points of view. You experience it only from your point of view. So that thing is, in one sense, it's a given. But then is the whole problem which philosophers call solipsism. You can Google that. Whole books have been written on that. In Vedanta, I just have this. In Vedanta, what you said is called Drishti Shrishti Vada. There's a difference between 2 approaches to Vedanta. One is Shrishti Drishti Vada. What is Shrishti Drishti Vada? It just means world is there and we are experiencing it. You start Vedanta from this point of view. That's what most people are comfortable with. There's a world that I'm experiencing, let's learn Vedanta. We start with this basis. It's a realist approach to Vedanta. But you go from here to pure consciousness. There's a whole series of steps. The other approach, a little more advanced, is Drishti Shrishti Vada, where the world is only in your experience. There is no world apart from your own experience. It's like the dream world. The person you saw in the dream, the car you saw in the dream does not exist. The pie the pizza you're eating in the dream, you can't put the leftovers for your tomorrow's night's dream, It disappears the moment you wake up. In the same way, this world also. So in the Drishti Shrishti Vada, they erase the clear demarcation we tend to make between dreaming and waking. Very methodically they erase it, and it will give you a very creepy feeling to read it. When they take up how do you prove that the waking world is not another dream? You trot out all your objections. It's not a dream because of such a 1, 2, 3, 4. The 10 objections they have thought of, and they replied to each one so convincingly that by the end of it, either you are scared, you want to shut the book, I don't want to hear any more of this. Reducing this world into a dream. Drishti Shrishtivada. Okay.
I'll just add that many near-death experiencers say that they discovered that in their near-death experience that this existence is a dream, that they were waking up to this existence much like we wake up to dreams at night. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a certain level of reality to this experience, but it's limited. It's just like our dreams, they can have very vivid, people have heart attacks from dreams, so they can have very real consequences, but it doesn't mean that it's essentially real.
I'm enjoying this dream.
He said he's enjoying the dream.
What is the role of the heart in the state of consciousness?
What is the role of the heart? We addressed that earlier, I think. There was a question about heart. What is heart? It's not the pump. Consciousness, heart. I don't know if I know how to answer that. Maybe one way we could look at it in describing what I mean by heart as being vulnerable and open and sensitive. We could see it as a doorway to maybe experience different levels of mind. But I can also say that there's a place of compassion if we use that word. All the words that I can think of are going to be inadequate. But if we approach it from, let's say, a place of compassion, that there is a level of compassion or an expanse of compassion to where there is a knowing about consciousness. I can't say it's an experience of consciousness because it's always there, it's always present, but there's a knowing of it. So I would see it as a doorway into the knowing of consciousness through compassion.
Very quickly, the heart in spiritual life has different meanings depending on your approach. If your approach is devotional, the path of love, bhakti, that heart means love. Love towards the divine, love towards everybody else. That's the heart. If your path is yoga, meditation, then the heart is a place which you locate in the center of, near your physiological heart, where you meditate. You tie your consciousness down there, your awareness down there. That means your attention down there, with a deity, with a mantra, with visualizations. It's the place for meditation. And in Advaita Vedanta, non-dual Vedanta, heart would be the Atman itself, the reality of this appearance itself. At the core of this appearance, your own being, that pure consciousness which we spoke about, that's the heart of existence.
I don't know if you all noticed that the only person wearing shoes in this hall, this sacred hall, is our shaman. And along with that, why he's wearing shoes, what is the feather and pipe ceremony?
Well, I guess they could be labeled as shoes, the moccasins. They were designed by my uncle Gerald Red Elk, and they were made by my mother in the traditional way. And there's meaning to all the symbols that are on the moccasins. I was at a powwow many years ago, and this is after Gerald had passed away, and I had an elder walk up to me, and he looked down and saw my feet. He said, "Oh, I see what you do." And I said, "You do? What do you see?" He said, "Those red bars on your moccasin says you help people." And I went, rolled my eyes and said, "Thanks, Gerald, there you go again, even after you're not here, getting me in trouble." So, but I wear these moccasins to honor him and to honor my mother who made them. And I wear them in special occasions and sometimes in ceremony but I wanted to honor the presence of my uncle by wearing the moccasins and the kindness of my mother by making them. And they are smoked elk hide and then regular latigo or leather on the bottom. But the moccasins also is the other part of moccasins, is it gives you some protection, but you can actually feel the ground. So it's to be close to Mother Earth, to be able to walk the earth and feel the mother. And what was the other part?
What is the feather and pipe ceremony?
I guess that may be in relationship to what I talked about the pipe ceremony and using the feather. Well, the feather is using for spreading the smoke, the sage. Sometimes the feather is used in smoothing out what maybe some people would call the aura or auric field. The medical view of it is the bioelectric field of the body. So when I'm talking to doctors, I talk about the bioelectric field. Other people, I may talk about the energy field or talk about the subtle body field maybe. And working with people, I'll use a feather in doing that. That's kind of in a traditional way. And the pipe itself, the pipe ceremony, there are various pipes. There are sharing pipes and there are personal pipes. Mine is a personal pipe. A sharing pipe is going to be longer and have a larger bowl, and it's used in ceremonies where there are other individuals involved, and you pass the pipe so that they can smoke the pipe. But the pipe, the meaning of the pipe is the stem represents the male, the man, and the bowl represents the feminine or the woman. And the two of them together produce children. So the pipe and the stem are kept separate when they're stored, and they're wrapped in red wool and put in usually a leather pipe bag for carrying around and storing. So when you're doing a pipe ceremony, you're celebrating life, and you're celebrating the creation of life. And also, when you put the tobacco in, or the herbs, but usually tobacco, that you are also honoring all the sacred directions. Would be, normally it's the 6 sacred directions, which are all the cardinal points, north, south, east, and west, and also grandfather and grandmother. But there's a 7th direction, which is hidden. And most people don't know about this. But the 7th direction is here, it's inward. So in doing a pipe, you're honoring all your relatives, all your relations, and all the directions, plus above and below and within. So, and the pipe ceremony itself is again, it's going through, which I said before, that when you're in the proper state of mind, positive state of mind, you can never do a ceremony wrong. So the pipe ceremony is a celebration of life. It's a celebration of the creation of life, and it's also a celebration of carrying what Native Americans would say, the smoke carries the prayer to the Great Spirit. It diffuses and it goes everywhere. So mine is a personal pipe, which is a shaman's pipe. So I use it for personal things, not all the time, but some of the times for personal things, but I also use it in ceremony where there's a physical thing that people can relate to and that they can experience and gives them a focus. Otherwise, I might do a ceremony and I don't use a pipe. It just depends on the circumstance.
To Swami, consciousness, according to you, is what in Sanskrit? Chaitanya, Atma, Brahman, or all three?
All three. Yeah, different names for them. If you ask for the closest name for consciousness, pure consciousness, remember consciousness, the way we use it in English and in modern parlance, when we speak about consciousness, is from Vedantic point of view, it's consciousness plus mind. So seeing, hearing, thinking, speaking, imagining, being happy, being sad, desiring, all of these from Vedantic perspective is pure consciousness overlaid with mind. So pure consciousness itself, the Sanskrit word would be Chaitanya. When it relates to who you are that pure consciousness, it would be called Atman. Atman means the self. If you think you are the body, then your body is Atman. If you think your body, so to you your body is the self right now. What Vedanta wants to do is to educate us, show us how the body is not the self. It is Anatman, not Atman. how the mind is not the Atman, it is Anatman, not Atman. And then you are driven to pure consciousness, which is the Atman. Brahman is the reality of this universe. Atman is your own reality, Brahman is the reality of the universe. In dualistic religions, you are the individual, Atman is the individual, Brahman is God. In non-dualistic religions, or in non-dualistic philosophy like Advaita, Brahman is Atman. One of the Mahavakyas, great statement says, Ayam Atma Brahma. This very Atman is Brahman. Shiva. Yes.
One more question for Swami. How does Advaita Vedanta view samadhi? This will be our last question.
Who asked this question? All right. There are different ways I can answer this. Remember, samadhi is a spiritual state of mind, but it's still a state of mind. Why would I say that? Because it comes and goes. Are you in samadhi now? Most of you would say no. Which means it's not there now. One day it might happen, and then you might even come out of it. That which comes and goes is not the ultimate reality. That which comes and goes cannot be the ultimate reality. It may be a very valuable, extremely valuable spiritual experience, but it's still an experience. It has a beginning and an end. It's a state of the mind. The Atman, pure consciousness, is what Advaita Vedanta aims at. So, making this distinction clear, samadhi can be a great, great help in illumination. I'm choosing my words very carefully. Samadhi can be a great, maybe the greatest help in illumination, in enlightenment, in realizing that you are Brahman, you are pure consciousness. Samadhi can be a very, very great help. But you can even do it without samadhi. That's the claim of many Advaitins who say that just by the process of listening to these truths, thinking deeply about them, and meditating on them, not trying to get samadhi. There's a meditation which you go for samadhi, which is yoga meditation. Patanjali yoga, goal is samadhi. And through samadhi, enlightenment. In Advaita Vedanta, the goal is listen, think about it, and what you have heard and thought about carefully, assimilate it through intensely dwelling on it. Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Okay.
Now I've got the surprise. I'd like to ask just a few of you what you have gotten out of this workshop. And it's going to be only 2 minutes each. And those of you who've been here for a longer time, Bob?
I said to someone earlier today that it's been extraordinarily helpful in the clarity it's brought, and it's helped me to understand what I know, which I think is what we all have to do, is to understand what we know.
Very good. Anybody else?
Candidate, on a journey, the state of experiencing intense pain, but not feeling the suffering, experience that, aspiring to get to that state of being able to heal myself and others, very gratifying to see you there and hugely inspired, and ultimately the aspiration of Aham Brahma Swami, which you just talked about.
Anybody else? One more person.
My takeaway from this is the merging of academic knowledge, which Dr. Janak brought in, and the practical knowledge, which the other person, I don't recall the name, sorry, Roger brought in, and Swamiji from his spiritual knowledge, all this 6 to 10,000-year-old knowledge from Vedic, Upanishads, texts and all. So we see the common thread. That's a fantastic thing to take away.
need, I think we need a woman representative. Anybody out there that can speak for from the, yes, okay, Sherry.
So I will apologize for all of the women. If this doesn't fit for you, but for me, I think it has raised so many questions for me that I feel my consciousness has expanded so much through this experience. And in that expansion, I feel full. At the same time, it feels like it will take years for me to fully embody all that has come from this. And I really would just like to thank all of you for sharing yourselves in such a, so it was such authenticity and love. And that's, I feel very rich right now.
Thank you. The Synthesis, Insights, and Inquiry, led by Swami Sarvapriyananda.
This is like a bit of a wrap-up. So I'll say a couple of words, and then I'll invite Jan and Roger to speak to us about what insights they are taking away from this workshop and how they are synthesizing all the diverse views, knowledge, research that we have been treated to. It's been a feast. And finally, inquiry. What questions arise now and what's the way forward? For me personally, as I was saying, that I was listening very carefully to both Jan and Roger. The near-death experiences, they have a very important bearing on the concept of the subtle body. Vedanta says the physical body, nobody denies it. It's material, it's physical. We experience it, and science also agrees, yes, there's a material universe out there and right here. But the subtle body, Vedanta says, even that is a kind of matter, even that is material. Remember, what is the definition of matter and consciousness in Vedanta? Anything that you can experience is matter. And that which experiences is consciousness. What a very elegant, a mathematician would love this kind of a definition. So you just put it to the test. Can you experience your mind? Can you experience your breathing? Of course you can. In that case, the mind and the prana and the buddhi, all these are parts, they're all our subtle body, they're parts of our subtle body. And if that is matter, is it matter in the scientific sense? Is it amenable to empirical observation and experimentation and verification? It should be on principle. In principle, it should be available for gathering evidence. And the NDEs, I think, near-death experiences, so much work has been done. I had heard about it, but now I know much more. And I think this is a very, very promising avenue for expanding today's very reductionist, materialistic, scientific paradigm. We can expand it. From a very different perspective, or different insight I get from Roger. I read somewhere that the sign of spirituality is this unconditional saying yes to life, completely being open to life and saying yes to life and embracing life and accepting it on its own terms. And you can see that's exactly what Roger has done. In our breakfast and supper and lunch, we've been talking about it. That's the first thing he did when he embarked upon his journey after emerging from the dark night of depression. He said yes to everything. He threw all the baggage out and he said yes to life. That's a sign of spiritual maturity. Another insight I take away from his talk is love. Not only saying yes to life, what is my response to life? Love. Unconditional love. Love which does not always require an object of love. Right? And that love is expressed as service. It's not just I love you and I feel good. It's not that I love you to feel good myself. What good does that love do to anybody else? It's expressed as service. Swami Ranganathanandaji, the Swami from whom I got sannyasa, the president of our order, he used to say, what is spirituality? When I close my eyes in meditation, I find peace within. When I open my eyes, my attitude is, what can I do for you? So it's a simple, practical, operational definition of spirituality. And if we contrast it with our lives, we'll see just the opposite. When I close my eyes, lots of disturbance. I didn't have all that disturbance before I started meditating. Only when I started meditating, I see so much disturbance in the mind. And when I open my eyes, not what I can do for you, what can I get from you? That's just the opposite of spirituality. So service. So life is all about service, love, and openness. So these are the insights I take away from Roger's presentations. And the stories, the powerful transformative effect of stories. I think one thing we'll remember from this whole thing, effortlessly remember, are the stories. That's the way our minds work. We love stories, we love narratives, and we effortlessly remember stories. Theories, science, not so much. So this is what I'm taking away from the conference. I would like to invite Jan, insights, synthesis, inquiry.
Well, one of the things that I've gotten from this experience is not knowing how my topic would relate to the Swamis and Rogers, and seeing the connectedness among us, the themes and I guess I would just say themes that are so similar. I resonated to everything both of them said. And in terms of Vedanta, I discovered the good fit between what we've learned from near-death experiences and Vedantic view of the cosmos. And from Roger, I got another confirmatory story of someone who had a near-death-like experience, which is qualitatively indistinguishable from the kind that occurs when someone is actually physically near death, and the after effects, but also my conceptions have expanded hearing about things like the brain entrainment process that was discovered in Roger's case. So the weekend has been very just very meaningful, and I can't imagine a place that I would rather have been than here.
What I'll take away from here is all of you. You know, looking at your faces, feeling your responses to the things I had to say is really powerful. You know that I know Swami Atmarupananda, and Swami Atmarupananda and Brahmaprana for a while were part of our Snowman's group. So over the years, through osmosis with Swami Atmarupananda, I learned some of Vedanta and some from Brahmaprana. I've learned even more since being here, Swami, and listening to you speak, and I'm impressed by your library of knowledge and your ability to retain it and your ability to compare various traditions and bring mental clarity in a lot of ways, and to people who listen to you. I enjoy your humor. So I don't know, I might become a Vedantist. And maybe I already am, I don't know. And Jan, you brought so many memories back to me, telling the stories of NDEs, and of course working with people in coma. I have been with people who have passed on, I've been with people who have come back. And it also reminded me of a lot of books I've read over the years of life after life and life after death, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It goes on and on and on, but I've thoroughly enjoyed the two of you. And also, Brahmapan, I want you to know that someone did say that you're a genius by bringing the three of us together and having the different aspects of our presentations and how well they melded together. So I gave a talk many, many years ago in La Crescenta, California, to the Vedanta Center, at the Vedanta Center there, and then a few years after that in Cohasset. And I really enjoyed those two centers, and this one is another one that I'll definitely will remember and enjoy, and maybe one day I'll be invited back. So I want to thank you for your hospitality and your interest to come for this weekend and to sit for so long to hear what we have to say.
Now, I have been watching Pravrajika Brahma Banerjee doing this thing, and you also have been watching her doing it, this whole conference and managing it. And one rare thing I have seen is, of course, it's beautifully managed and beautifully organized, but usually the organizer and also the MC, these are the persons who do not get time to listen to the talks. Because I have done that job sometimes in the monastery in Belur. You have got 100 different things on your mind, lunch and what's the weather like and what's going to happen next. And you're busy because the whole thing is running on your plan. And then to sit and carefully listen to the talks and follow the discussions, that's a rare ability. So Pravrajika ji has been listening to all the talks very carefully. And I would like to know, we would all like to know what insights she is taking away from this event, which she has originated herself, and what is the synthesis she is doing, and what's next, especially she's the one to say what's next, what's going to happen next. Mataji.
It's always been my dream to have something like this happen, because monasteries have traditionally been sources of knowledge. And Vedanta not only means a strain of a tradition within India, but it means vid, knowledge. And we receive that knowledge not by separating ourselves from others, but by engaging in other religious traditions, with other religious traditions, and through interdisciplinary conferences and working with other peoples. And this is what Vedanta does. When I became a Vedantist, coming from another tradition, and when I went to India, and I did a whole pilgrimage on caves, the caves in India, and I saw how the Buddhist caves were next to the Jain caves, were next to the Hindu caves. I realized that Hinduism is a living organism that has not been static. It started, how it started, where it started, we're still discovering, but it moved and expanded and deepened. And Swami Vivekananda, he broke the bar of what it means to expand and deepen. He took from his master, who expanded and deepened, what knowledge is by practicing all of the various religious traditions to their culmination. And he brought that message here. And when Vivekananda met the American people, he expanded and deepened Hinduism even further. So now he has made the Vedanta tradition understandable. Any child could understand. And it also appeals to the highest intellects. This is the tradition I am proud to be a part of. And by you being present here, you're also part of that Vedanta tradition, which means knowledge. You're seekers of knowledge. And in the process, Vivekananda has been recognized by the Smithsonian Institute as one of 29 eminent foreign visitors, because he's changed the spiritual landscape of America. So I am so grateful to you for being part of that. We all agree, the speakers and I, what a profoundly intense audience you are. You brought your listening to this conference and you brought it up to a very high level. And I am very grateful to our volunteers who have worked selflessly, and without them, we could not have this. I'd just like to give a round of applause to all those volunteers. And to our board of trustees and advisors who let me get away with something like this. And so this is our third one such, and we've had others, and those DVDs are available if you're interested. And if you are interested in having a DVD of this program, please sign up outside. And if in fact you feel cheated and you want even more of this conference, this type of dialogue at Southern Methodist University tomorrow night, we will have Investigating Consciousness, a Swami and a Shaman in Proto Hall from 7 to 9, and you're all invited. So it's a $10 fee, but it's registration at the door, so you all are invited. So now we are going to close with a very beautiful ceremony. We've been talking about consciousness. The word for Brahman is Sat Chid Ananda. Sat is existence. We have had meditations on pure isness, existence. And we've had meditations on Chid, consciousness, which also means knowledge, and Ananda, which is pure love. And this pure love, this pure bliss is consciousness, is existence. And so what we typically do in our tradition, whenever we do something like this, it is a worship. And so we offer the fruits of all our actions, all of our thoughts, whatever we've done here today, back to the source, the one true source of the light of consciousness, which is the one truth called by various names. And so we will have what is called an arati ceremony, a weaving of the lights. And we have before us the founder of our order, Ramakrishna, Sarada Devi, Swami Vivekananda, and representing the three major traditions of the world. We also have Jesus and Lord Buddha. And then we have the symbol Om, which is the one symbol representing all traditions of the world. And then as part of that ceremony, we offer the light to that light which is within you. At the end, we pass the light, and traditionally we take what is called the prasad from the light and pass it over our head. And you're welcome to do it or not do it, but the ceremony will be performed. And now we understand it's raining. Ranjana has an announcement, and I hope there's food in the announcement.
This is not an announcement. My name is Ranjana and I'm the president of the trustee board. I just wanted to take a moment to thank Brahma Pranaji, who's our resident minister. She has, not only is she totally in pursuit of interfaith initiatives that she has brought to this center ever since she took over, but she has put this whole workshop brilliantly, as Swami Sarvapriyanandaji said. It is totally her own idea. She got all the speakers, she got everyone to agree, and the trustee board is delighted with Brahma Pranaji tirelessly leading us and fearlessly leading us down this path. So I just wanted to say thank you to her.
So soup's on.
Food and come back inside. It's really
Roger just went inside.